"Jason, which do you like better, white or pink?" Emily piped up. Lying on the big bed with her phone in her hands, she'd been picking out a bridal bouquet for a week now and still couldn't decide. "I like both," Jason replied politely, but without much interest, barely glancing at the photo. "Why is this so hard?" Emily questioned in anguish. "Order anyone you want." "Does anyone even matter?" Chuckling, the groom inquired, turning off the light fixture. "You don't understand. Everything has to be perfect." Emily gave him a surprised look and continued her search. 6 months had passed since Jason had proposed to her, and there wasn't a day that went by that Emily didn't talk about the upcoming wedding. She'd booked and picked things out, consulted with her friends. Everything else seemed to have lost its importance to her. Jason, on the other hand, found the endless preparations irritating. He tried to stand back and watch from the sidelines, and then, on the day of the wedding, to participate in the prepared event as an actor in the play. "Jason," Emily said, "you're not helping at all," as Mom lamented. "Mom, but don't even get me started. Someone has to pay for this whole extravaganza. So that's me. In case you forgot, I work and I don't care what color the cake is or what they serve it to us," and the son brushed it off. He did work hard, even though his parents were well-to-do people, but the only thing he owed them was a good education. They never spared any money for it. However, having received a diploma, the son never asked for help. On the contrary, he tried to help himself. Now that he was to start a family, Jason felt even more responsibility. The bride was used to luxury. Her father and mother had raised her like a princess. She got everything she wanted, from expensive clothes to trips abroad. After marriage, she would hardly want to limit herself in anything. Parents on both sides, who once had introduced the young people, were very pleased with this union. Both are handsome with serious education, ambitions, business. What else do you need? That their mothers, who could not really stand each other, diligently portrayed friendship, exchanged recipes, praised the children, and pestered their husbands with gossip about each other. Fathers took a much simpler approach. When they met, they discussed business and the latest news. "No, but did you see the dress she was wearing today? 50 years old at lunchtime, and she still looks like a girl," Barbara resented her after a family evening with Emily's parents. "Oh, come on, really. Whatever she wants to wear, she wears," her husband grudgingly replied. With the wedding a week away, all the women lost their peace. Emily loved her jewelry. The moms got busy revising the holiday menu. Jason stayed late at work every day just to avoid talking about the upcoming festivities. Of course, he couldn't do that because everyone was looking to him for advice, or at least approval. Another unpleasant conversation took place with his mother right before the gala. "Jason," she addressed her son as he sat on the couch in her living room. "What?" he asked nonchalantly, leaning back against the large padded backrest. "You're not comfortable with these wedding preparations after all," she said condescendingly. "Pardon me," Jason said jokingly. "There's been no end to it for months now. Yeah, I'd give anything to make this day go by as quickly as possible." "Okay, you're kidding." "I can see Emily's worried, trying, and it's like you're not happy at all." Barbara looked at her son warily and continued. "Do you still feel bad about that Ashley of yours?" "I told you not to talk about it," Jason said sternly. "And if that's why you called me here, I'd better go." "Come on, why are you being so forward?" "I was just asking. I want you to be happy. Don't I?" But Jason wasn't convinced by the last words. He packed up and was soon on his way home. "You're nervous after all," Barbara said aloud, watching from the window as the car pulled out of the gate. "Gee, still haven't forgotten." At last, the long-awaited day came. In the morning, a whole team came to them. A photographer, a makeup artist, a hairdresser. The morning of the bride photo shoot went perfectly. Emily was satisfied and immediately went on business. Jason stayed at home, realizing that the first photo shoot was enough for him. The groom, in a beautiful blue suit with a butterfly and a white flower in his buttonhole, arrived at the registry office in different cars. He was waiting for the bride with the guests at the entrance to the building. A large white limousine pulled up. Jason opened the door and offered his hand to his beautiful bride. The crowd applauded with admiration. Emily was truly beautiful in a lush cream dress with open shoulders and graceful hair, with delicate makeup. The earrings and necklace around her neck shone in the summer sunlight. Jason handed her a bouquet of soft pink flowers he'd picked up from the store on the way out. Then the procession moved inside the whitewashed building. The gilded staircase was covered with a red carpet. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. It was a real old palace. Emily really wanted the registration to take place here. When the couple entered the hall, the mothers involuntarily admired the children. Barbara even folded her arms across her chest and cried. It looked so touching. Under the words of the wedding registrar about love and fidelity cried all the women present. After the exchange of rings, kisses, bouquets, hugs, and photo session, the newlyweds and guests went to the embankment, where on one side was a well-groomed green park, and on the other, the river. The photos here turned out just great, while the guests drank champagne and admired the views. The newlyweds and the photographer stepped aside the white gazebo to take some beautiful shots. Emily posed contentedly. Jason tried to play along, but he wished it would all be over soon. They stepped back to a bench with a huge flowering bush above it. The bride's bouquet, which its owner had so carefully chosen, remained lying on the side of the arbor. Suddenly a boy appeared from behind the trees. He ran up, grabbed the flowers, and rushed across the path into the bushes. Before everyone realized what was happening, the boy was gone. Jason saw his wife's confused face, ready to cry. She'd been preparing for this day for so long, and everything was supposed to go perfectly. And now this. Okay, I'll catch up with him and bring him back in 5 minutes, he reassured his fiancée and quickly headed off in the direction where the kid had disappeared half a minute ago. Strange. He didn't look like a street kid dressed normally, like all teenagers. His hair and hands were clean. Not a wealthy family, but not a poor one. But why did he need someone else's wedding bouquet? The boy ran down the street, holding the flowers to his chest. Did he realize he was being chased? It was unclear. He was in a hurry, moving along the edge of the footpath so that cyclists and passers-by wouldn't get in his way. Mothers with strollers, school children, grandmothers, many turned around, watching the strange sight of a man in a groom's suit running after a child with flowers in his hands. Finally, Jason stopped and wanted to turn back. To hell with the bouquet. He'd say the boy had gotten lost in the crowd or thrown the flowers into the water, but his feet wouldn't go there for some reason. It's still only noon. Ahead awaits a feast, congratulations, gifts, dancing. Frankly speaking, this celebration of life bored him very much. Jason glanced toward the street where the thief had gone and saw a figure lying in the distance. He thought for a few seconds, then hurried after him again. He turned into the courtyard, slowed to catch his breath, and wandered past the houses. At one of the playgrounds, a group of kids called out to him, "Look, here comes our Jason Hay. What are you doing? All by yourself?" "No hat," a tall guy mockingly asked, sitting on a small, rusty merry-go-round. The other guys laughed. "Give me a break," muttered the boy and walked quickly past with his head down. "What's that flowers you've got there?" "Well, give them here." "I'll give them to Svetka." The boy stood up and followed. Jason ran away, apparently afraid that the stolen bouquet would be taken away again. What the hell is going on here? Jason wondered. Watching this scene and seeing that the boys had already approached the boy, he hurried over to them. "Hey," he called out to the company. The bullies looked back. "Can't you buy flowers for a girl? Just don't molest the little one, none of your business." The boy took offense. Jason followed the boy, who managed to sneak away and headed further into the yards behind the high rise to a small stone house. Judging by the windows, there were 2 or 3 apartments on the first and second floors. Here the groom, for the second time, thought that he should return. But the tramp had stolen the bouquet. Perhaps he wants to sell it or give it to the grandmother the children on the playground just mentioned. Just go to the nearest florist and buy something suitable. The guests are probably already nervous, not realizing where he disappeared to. And as luck would have it, the phone was left in the car. "We have to leave for the restaurant in 20 minutes. But something still prevented me from turning around and heading back. Better call a cab right away." Curiosity, I guess. Had he run across the street to get here for nothing? Jason, in his fancy suit, looked strange and out of place amid the poverty and ruin that surrounded him. Surprising. He'd driven through these parts several times, but he hadn't even known what the old Soviet courtyards hid. The walls of the house were crumbling, and there was a big black stain under the roof, as if something had hit the surface hard, but had not made a hole, only exposed the insides. Several of the windows were missing their panes. Behind them were empty rooms with peeling wallpaper. The porch steps were nearly collapsed. The wooden door hung on a single hinge. Inside the building, Jason was surrounded by the smell of a long unventilated cellar, damp and musty. Shabby green walls, dirty stairs. The house seemed abandoned and living out its last days. There were voices upstairs. Jason headed there cautiously, treading for fear of falling through. "Why did you steal the bouquet?" The voice sounded strange amidst the silence. Jason entered the apartment, and the first thing that caught his eye was the elderly woman sitting by the window and the boy hiding in the corner behind a huge closet. "I'm giving it to my mom," he answered timidly, not expecting a chase. The thief was frightened when his grandmother told him that some man had come for him, for drying roses and giving them to her when she comes back. Jason looked at the woman. "The one in the colony," she replied indifferently. "And this is my grandson, Jason. Why are you taking someone else's?" "You give the flowers back," she said to the boy, and he looked at the guest, who was less interested in the unfortunate bouquet than anything else. He walked over to the shelf and scrutinized the photograph. "Is that your daughter?" I asked in surprise. "Yes," she answered indifferently, as if being in a stranger's house did not embarrass her at all. "And she's the one in the colony now," Jason continued, puzzled. "You're getting married today, aren't you?" the hostess inquired. "A wedding?" The groom hesitated, and then came to his senses half a minute later. "Oh, right, the wedding. What happened to Ashley?" "Something happened at work. They set her up," I guess the woman reluctantly recounted. "We didn't have money for a lawyer, and the boss was very important." The woman and her grandson watched the strange stranger, who stepped back to the door in confusion. Then he turned around, mumbled something, glanced at the boy, which made him startle again, and clutched the bouquet to his chest. "Jason, give me the flowers back, please. We'll get lilacs later when we go to meet her." Grandma interrupted the awkward moment. "No, leave them," the guest interjected. "How old are you?" "6," the boy answered timidly. "I see," Jason replied hurriedly, deciding to think about it later. "I have to go now, but can I come and see you again?" The grandmother and grandson looked at each other. "Didn't you know her?" the woman inquired, waving toward the framed photograph. Jason nodded in response. "Come on over, we're almost always here. Jason isn't going to school until next year." The return trip took no more than 4 minutes. Sitting in the cab, Jason couldn't see any streets or stops. He looked at his own reflection in the side mirror and remembered how he'd once stood under the windows of a college dormitory with a huge bouquet of white roses. A small, fragile girl who seemed to him the most beautiful in the world had come out to him then. "Or are those for me?" She looked happily at the flowers. "Yes," Jason reminded himself. They stood there under curious stares from the windows in the fine rain, but there was no way they could part. And then he'd gone to study abroad, and they'd been lost. "Where have you been so long? And where's the bouquet?" Emily interrupted his musings abruptly. Resentment was simmering inside her. They hadn't finished the photo shoot, but they should have already left for the restaurant. The flowers were gone, and he hadn't even thought to buy other ones. Only the faces of the guests surrounding her stopped her from making a scandal. The boy ran away and hid somewhere. "I haven't found him," her husband answered her absent-mindedly. "Are you out of your mind?" Giving vent to her anger, Emily hissed. "You've been gone for half an hour." "Shh, shh. Emily, it's okay. Daddy and I are going to go and get another bouquet. In the meantime, go to the restaurant." Her mother tried to calm her down. "But why should you miss the celebration now?" continued to get upset daughter. "Nothing," we quickly assured the parents and went to the car. The day for the bride was hopelessly ruined. She had so carefully thought out everything, tried so hard, and then some stupidity ruined everything. All the resentment was directed not at the boy who had stolen the flowers for some reason, but at her husband who had acted so foolishly, and now stands in front of her with such an indifferent look, as if it does not concern him at all. "What's the matter with you?" she whispered to him when everyone had dispersed and the newlyweds were at a separate, beautifully decorated table. "I'm fine. You know how tiring these events are for me, don't you? At some point, the banquet moved from the building to the street, or rather, to the cozy, spacious courtyard of the restaurant. Jason hadn't noticed Emily changing her dress to a more comfortable outfit. She posed for pictures, smiling feignedly, hugging her parents and friends, laughing, asking for more champagne, but keeping a glance at her husband. The whole show was played for the guests. A heavy feeling grew inside that something was wrong. Jason had made some jokes about her preparations, not a lot of initiative, but tonight he'd been too distant. Dusk had fallen on the city. The cool of the evening, the lights came on. The guests scattered around the grounds. Some were chatting at tables, some were dancing, some were swinging on the big swings. Ahead of them was still waiting for a huge cake, which the newlyweds had to cut together. Then tea, dancing, bingo lights, and final photos together. Emily stepped away from Mom and Dad and looked around absent-mindedly. Jason was nowhere to be found. Pretending to walk from one guest to another, Emily tried to figure out where her husband had gone. He was standing on the small terrace overlooking the river, leaning on the parapet. "It's beautiful," he said, without looking at the girl. The city glowed below, the red sunset and street lights reflected in the water. "Yes," Emily answered automatically. "Let's go to the guests." He was upset for some reason and looked at her with an annoyed look. "Let's go," she smiled again, deciding to deal with it later. The rest of the evening went beautifully. Beautiful music, a gorgeous white and red cake that everyone was smitten with, a spectacular and concluding part of the event, a joint photo. But as soon as the guests left, there was silence. The celebration was abruptly turned off. Music was playing. The noise of the city came from the half-opened window, but there was a heavy silence between them. Emily took offense at the day's events. Jason, on the other hand, saw the boy hiding behind the closet. After a week, the relationship mended. Work, household chores, visits. In the hustle and bustle of everyday life, the thoughts dissipated. Spoiled holiday seemed now not so bad, especially since friends, relatives, and colleagues were satisfied. On the weekend, she had a chance to visit the house that had been on her mind. Emily decided to have a reunion with her friends outside of town at some new fancy salon. Jason was happy to approve the idea. He had about 5 hours to make the trip and drive back. He caught Jason in the yard trying to ride a small bicycle without pedals. The neighborhood was empty. The playground was overgrown with grass, the paths were cracked, and the wall of a large, unfinished house blocked it from the other yards. Jason looked around. It was depressing and eerie to see a child in a wasteland of old, dilapidated buildings. "Hi," he greeted the boy cheerfully. "What's the matter with your bike?" "It's falling apart," he replied shortly and clearly. And then he was shy, apparently deciding that he had said it too boldly. "That's too bad," Jason sighed. "Drop it, and let's see what I brought you." The boy's eyes lit up, but then he remembered his fear again and continued to stand still. "Well, come on, take the present as soon as you can." "Is this for me forever?" Jason asked incredulously. "Forever for you," he nodded. "I'll leave it here. I'm going to go see your grandmother." Jason walked into the driveway and watched from the dirty window as the boy paused, looked toward the house, and rushed to unseal the box. Inside was a big blue machine with a remote control. If anyone knew what a child who had received no more than a couple of presents in his 6 years felt at that moment, they would understand. It was a real feeling of happiness. Jason watched the scene in the yard with a satisfied look and went upstairs. Grandma opened the door, inviting him inside. The room felt cleaner. The same wedding bouquet still stood in a vase on the window. "Won't let me throw it away," Grandma explained. They'd met. Her name was Rachel. She had lived in this house for 40 years, and now it was recognized as an emergency, and soon she and her grandson were to move. But so far there was no news, and they, along with a few neighbors, were staying there. Of course, I realize that it's already getting dangerous here, and Jason will need to go to school. His classmates will make fun of him for living in a slum. But I'm so attached to this house in my heart. My husband and I lived here, and Ashley was born here, she said as she looked around the walls. "How does she write?" Jason took the opportunity to ask. "Yes, she sends a letter once a month. We read it together with my grandson. Then we write a reply." "Who's his father?" I don't know. Someone took care of his daughter, came with flowers and gifts, but she wouldn't tell me. And then here was Jason. When she was put away, it was just the two of us. Ashley looked noticeably older than her years, and Jason looked a lot like his mom. Jason suddenly pictured her here, standing by the window or dusting the bookshelves. There was an unpleasant prickling in his chest. "Bah, look," Jason said contentedly as he entered. He was still embarrassed to have a guest, but his joy was overflowing. Seeing the table full of goodies made him even more excited, and after half an hour, there was no trace of embarrassment left. As he walked out, Jason felt a cozy warmth spread through his body. It was strange, but this old house, with its empty windows gaping in the evening light, no longer seemed like a haven for alcoholics and homeless people. Even a place like this, it turned out, could be nicer to be in than his stylish apartment with its whitewashed ceiling, which still smelled pleasantly new. He patted his hand lightly on his pants pocket, where a small bag contained a few blonde hairs he discreetly removed from his comb. Waiting for the test results had taken several agonizing days. The moment he was handed the cherished envelope seemed to turn everything in his life upside down. A son. He had a son. How to live with that now? What to do? Thoughts swirled in his head, interrupting each other. "Son, wow, Jason, look at that. Do you like it?" Someone's voice broke into thought. Emily was standing in front of him with an open sketchbook that flaunted several kitchen options. "What? I don't understand," he asked. "Well, look. Do you like this one?" The girl pointed her finger at one of the pictures. "I don't care." "Pick it yourself," her husband replied without looking. "You don't care?" "I don't understand. Jason, what's going on? Are we living together or what?" "Emily, I don't care about the kitchen right now, especially since you're going to do as you please anyway." She hummed resentfully and withdrew. Jason was glad she did, though. He really didn't care about the household chores in the apartment or his wife's outfits. He wasn't ready to discuss the matter with her, imagining her reaction in advance. Trips to see his son had become regular, but he didn't know how to start a conversation about their kinship. In the fall, Jason decided to go to Ashley's colony, not even knowing why or what he would do afterward. He was determined to find her. According to Rachel's story, he had another 6 months left to serve. The prison building was in a neighboring town. The gray and gloomy red brick structure had no windows on the outside and was surrounded by a high stone fence with barbed wire on top. Jason was let through the checkpoint and escorted to the supervisor's office. "I was told you were here to see Ashley Fedorova," a stout older man in a uniform asked him. "Yes, can I see her?" "No, unfortunately," the man stretched out. "Why?" Jason asked confidently, ready to use his money and all his assertiveness, but the answer stunned him. "Well, she died. From tuberculosis. Buried here in our cemetery, but I can't let you in. Only relatives, and there are no relatives." So that's it, he was talking to himself while Jason sat back in his chair, hearing everything through a shroud of confusion and incomprehension. "How did she die?" he finally uttered. "Just like that," the warden said nervously. "Like all people die, so she. And what will you be to her? She only has a sick mother, right?" "Yes, the son, I think. You know so much about the families of prisoners. Don't lose your senses," asked the visitor. "Well, I have to. It's just a job," he explained with a wave of his hands. As Jason struck that blow, he didn't know how to tell Rachel and the boy what had happened. The child had waited so long for his mother, kept all the gifts he'd prepared for her in his locker in the form of cards and drawings. It would be cruel to announce her death to him, but holding back wasn't the best idea either. Anyway, the difficult moment was postponed and postponed. Emily became nervous, getting worked up over anything, whether it was things left in the wrong place or a missed phone call. Several times her husband was ready to tell her what was going on in his life. But for some reason, every time she started talking about money, fashion, and her friends' personal lives, the urge was gone. Jason was pretty sure she wouldn't understand him. What's more, it would make her jealous. Rachel had been sick for a long time and had gotten used to her condition, but now she was not feeling well at all. When Jason arrived, he found his son at his first-floor neighbor's house. The grandmother was taken to the hospital. When he arrived and entered her room, he noticed at once how much she had changed. A thin, pale face, trembling hands. The nurse had warned him that the patient was too weak to talk, but seeing how pleased she was, she let him stay and left. "What about you, Rachel?" Jason asked affectionately. "I wanted to see my grandson off to first grade, but I don't think I'm going to make it," she said. "You'll make it. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. And you'll be fine." "Jason, I didn't forget. No, I need to talk to you now before it's too late." "What about?" "I know there's a reason you're here." "Yes, you're right." Jason was unprepared for this conversation, frantically searching for words. "Your son," the woman guessed. "Yes, he is." Jason sighed. "Well, that's good. Please don't leave him when I'm gone." "What are you talking about? It'll be all right. Promise," Rachel insisted. "I promise," he gave in. They hugged goodbye, and Jason left, determined to return again as soon as work allowed. But that was the last time they'd see each other, because a couple days later the hospital told him his grandmother had died. The boy was confused to learn that his grandmother was gone. It was the second scariest day of his life after his mom was taken away by uniformed men. He ran to his room, climbed onto the couch, and huddled in a corner. His father sat beside him, wondering if he should tell him now about something he should have done a long time ago. "Jason, I know how hard this is for you," he began, and he heard the boy sobbing softly. "But there's something I have to tell you. Do you understand? I'm not a stranger to you." "I guessed that a long time ago," the boy said as he continued to cry. "You did? I'm sorry I didn't tell you right away. I was afraid. In case you didn't want to talk to me." The boy stood up and looked at his father with eyes red from tears. "Can I give you a hug?" Jason asked. The boy nodded. He hugged his son for the first time and felt him cling to him tightly. He shuddered, breathing deeply, clutching at his father's coat. Something had to be done right away. "I can't take you away right now," Jason said with difficulty. He felt small hands gripping the edges of his clothes tighter. "But it's temporary. I'll do the paperwork and pick you up right away, okay?" It was unbearably sad to leave him. Of course, it wasn't the paperwork, it was Emily who had to be prepared. At least the neighbor was a good woman who'd known the boy since he was a baby. Jason involved several lawyers he knew in his case, so that everything could be resolved as quickly as possible without sending the child to an orphanage. They assured him that the case would be resolved as needed. There are no other relatives, no one to claim custody. The only thing that matters is that the wife is okay with it. The wife. Here's the hardest part of the case. "Jason, which do you like better, white or pink?" Emily piped up. Lying on the big bed with her phone in her hands, she'd been picking out a bridal bouquet for a week now and still couldn't decide. "I like both," Jason replied politely, but without much interest, barely glancing at the photo. "Why is this so hard?" Emily questioned in anguish. "Order anyone you want." "Does anyone even matter?" Chuckling, the groom inquired, turning off the light fixture. "You don't understand. Everything has to be perfect." Emily gave him a surprised look and continued her search. 6 months had passed since Jason had proposed to her, and there wasn't a day that went by that Emily didn't talk about the upcoming wedding. She booked and picked things out, consulted with her friends. Everything else seemed to have lost its importance to her. Jason, on the other hand, found the endless preparations irritating. He tried to stand back and watch from the sidelines, and then, on the day of the wedding, to participate in the prepared event as an actor in the play. "Jason," Emily said, "you're not helping at all," his mom lamented. "Mom, but don't even get me started. Someone has to pay for this whole extravaganza. So that's me. In case you forgot, I work and I don't care what color the cake is or what they serve it to us," and the son brushed it off. He did work hard, even though his parents were well-to-do people, but the only thing he owed them was a good education. They never spared any money for it. However, having received a diploma, the son never asked for help. On the contrary, he tried to help himself. Now that he was to start a family, Jason felt even more responsibility. The bride was used to luxury. Her father and mother had raised her like a princess. She got everything she wanted, from expensive clothes to trips abroad. After marriage, she would hardly want to limit herself in anything. Parents on both sides, who once had introduced the young people, were very pleased with this union. Both are handsome with serious education, ambitions, business. What else do you need? That their mothers, who could not really stand each other, diligently portrayed friendship, exchanged recipes, praised the children, and pestered their husbands with gossip about each other. Fathers took a much simpler approach. When they met, they discussed business and the latest news. No, but did you see the dress she was wearing today? 50 years old at lunchtime, and she still looks like a girl Barbara resented her after a family evening with Emily's parents. Oh, come on, really. Whatever she wants to wear, she wears, her husband grudgingly replied. With the wedding a week away, all the women lost their peace. Emily loved her jewelry. The moms got busy revising the holiday menu. Jason stayed late at work every day just to avoid talking about the upcoming festivities. Of course, he couldn't do that because everyone was looking to him for advice, or at least approval. Another unpleasant conversation took place with his mother right before the gala. Jason, she addressed her son as he sat on the couch in her living room. "What?" he asked nonchalantly, leaning back against the large padded backrest. "You're not comfortable with these wedding preparations after all," she said condescendingly. "Pardon me," Jason said jokingly. "There's been no end to it for months now. Yeah, I'd give anything to make this day go by as quickly as possible." "Okay, you're kidding." "I can see Emily's worried, trying, and it's like you're not happy at all." Barbara looked at her son warily and continued. "Do you still feel bad about that Ashley of yours?" "I told you not to talk about it," Jason said sternly. "And if that's why you called me here, I'd better go." "Come on, why are you being so forward? I was just asking. I want you to be happy. Don't I?" But Jason wasn't convinced by the last words. He packed up and was soon on his way home. "You're nervous after all," Barbara said aloud, watching from the window as the car pulled out of the gate. "She still haven't forgotten." At last, the long-awaited day came. In the morning, a whole team came to them. A photographer, a makeup artist, a hairdresser. The morning of the bride photo shoot went perfectly. Emily was satisfied and immediately went on business. Jason stayed at home, realizing that the first photo shoot was enough for him. The groom, in a beautiful blue suit with a butterfly and a white flower in his buttonhole, arrived at the registry office in different cars. He was waiting for the bride with the guests at the entrance to the building. A large white limousine pulled up. Jason opened the door and offered his hand to his beautiful bride. The crowd applauded with admiration. Emily was truly beautiful in a lush cream dress with open shoulders and graceful hair. With delicate makeup, the earrings and necklace around her neck shone in the summer sunlight. Jason handed her a bouquet of soft pink flowers he'd picked up from the store on the way out. Then the procession moved inside the whitewashed building. The gilded staircase was covered with a red carpet. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. It was a real old palace. Emily really wanted the registration to take place here. When the couple entered the hall, the mothers involuntarily admired the children. Barbara even folded her arms across her chest and cried. It looked so touching. Under the words of the wedding registrar about love and fidelity, cried all the women present. After the exchange of rings, kisses, bouquets, hugs, and photo session, the newlyweds and guests went to the embankment, where on one side was a well-groomed green park, and on the other, the river. The photos here turned out just great, while the guests drank champagne and admired the views. The newlyweds and the photographer stepped aside the white gazebo to take some beautiful shots. Emily posed contentedly. Jason tried to play along, but he wished it would all be over soon. They stepped back to a bench with a huge flowering bush above it. The bride's bouquet, which its owner had so carefully chosen, remained lying on the side of the arbor. Suddenly a boy appeared from behind the trees. He ran up, grabbed the flowers, and rushed across the path into the bushes. Before everyone realized what was happening, the boy was gone. Jason saw his wife's confused face, ready to cry. She'd been preparing for this day for so long, and everything was supposed to go perfectly. And now this. "Okay, I'll catch up with him and bring him back in 5 minutes," he reassured his fiancée and quickly headed off in the direction where the kid had disappeared half a minute ago. Strange. He didn't look like a street kid dressed normally, like all teenagers. His hair and hands were clean. Not a wealthy family, but not a poor one. But why did he need someone else's wedding bouquet? The boy ran down the street, holding the flowers to his chest. Did he realize he was being chased? It was unclear. He was in a hurry, moving along the edge of the footpath so that cyclists and passers-by wouldn't get in his way. Mothers with strollers, school children, grandmothers, many turned around, watching the strange sight of a man in a groom's suit running after a child with flowers in his hands. Finally, Jason stopped and wanted to turn back. To hell with the bouquet. He'd say the boy had gotten lost in the crowd or thrown the flowers into the water, but his feet wouldn't go there for some reason. It's still only noon. Ahead awaits a feast, congratulations, gifts, dancing. Frankly speaking, this celebration of life bored him very much. Jason glanced toward the street where the thief had gone and saw a figure lying in the distance. He thought for a few seconds, then hurried after him again. He turned into the courtyard, slowed to catch his breath, and wandered past the houses. At one of the playgrounds, a group of kids called out to him, "Look, here comes our Jason Hay. What are you doing? All by yourself?" "No hat," a tall guy mockingly asked, sitting on a small, rusty merry-go-round. The other guys laughed. "Give me a break," muttered the boy and walked quickly past with his head down. "What's that flowers you've got there?" "Well, give them here." "I'll give them to Svetka." The boy stood up and followed. Jason ran away, apparently afraid that the stolen bouquet would be taken away again. What the hell is going on here? Jason wondered. Watching this scene and seeing that the boys had already approached the boy, he hurried over to them. "Hey," he called out to the company. The bullies looked back. "Can't you buy flowers for a girl? Just don't molest the little one, none of your business." The boy took offense. Jason followed the boy, who managed to sneak away and headed further into the yards behind the high rise to a small stone house. Judging by the windows, there were 2 or 3 apartments on the first and second floors. Here the groom, for the second time, thought that he should return. But the tramp had stolen the bouquet. Perhaps he wants to sell it or give it to the grandmother the children on the playground just mentioned. Just go to the nearest florist and buy something suitable. The guests are probably already nervous, not realizing where he disappeared to, and as luck would have it, the phone was left in the car. "We have to leave for the restaurant in 20 minutes, but something still prevented me from turning around and heading back. Better call a cab right away." Curiosity, I guess. Had he run across the street to get here for nothing? Jason, in his fancy suit, looked strange and out of place amid the poverty and ruin that surrounded him. Surprising. He'd driven through these parts several times, but he hadn't even known what the old Soviet courtyards hid. The walls of the house were crumbling, and there was a big black stain under the roof, as if something had hit the surface hard, but had not made a hole, only exposed the insides. Several of the windows were missing their panes. Behind them were empty rooms with peeling wallpaper. The porch steps were nearly collapsed. The wooden door hung on a single hinge. Inside the building, Jason was surrounded by the smell of a long, unventilated cellar, damp and musty. Shabby green walls, dirty stairs. The house seemed abandoned and living out its last days. There were voices upstairs. Jason headed there cautiously, treading for fear of falling through. "Why did you steal the bouquet?" The voice sounded strange amidst the silence. Jason entered the apartment, and the first thing that caught his eye was the elderly woman sitting by the window and the boy hiding in the corner behind a huge closet. "I'm giving it to my mom," he answered timidly, not expecting a chase. The thief was frightened when his grandmother told him that some man had come for him, for drying roses and giving them to her when she comes back. Jason looked at the woman. "The one in the colony," she replied indifferently. "And this is my grandson, Jason. Why are you taking someone else's?" "He'd give the flowers back," she said to the boy, and he looked at the guest, who was less interested in the unfortunate bouquet than anything else. He walked over to the shelf and scrutinized the photograph. "Is that your daughter?" I asked in surprise. "Yes," she answered indifferently, as if being in a stranger's house did not embarrass her at all. "And she's the one in the colony now," Jason continued, puzzled. "You're getting married today, aren't you?" the hostess inquired. "A wedding?" The groom hesitated, and then came to his senses half a minute later. "Oh, right, the wedding. What happened to Ashley?" "Something happened at work. They set her up," I guess the woman reluctantly recounted. "We didn't have money for a lawyer, and the boss was very important. The woman and her grandson watched the strange stranger, who stepped back to the door in confusion. Then he turned around, mumbled something, glanced at the boy, which made him startle again, and clutched the bouquet to his chest. "Jason, give me the flowers back, please. We'll get lilacs later when we go to meet her," Grandma interrupted the awkward moment. "No, leave them," the guest interjected. "How old are you?" "6," the boy answered timidly. "I see," Jason replied hurriedly, deciding to think about it later. "I have to go now, but can I come and see you again?" The grandmother and grandson looked at each other. "Didn't you know her?" the woman inquired, waving toward the framed photograph. Jason nodded in response. "Come on over, we're almost always here. Jason isn't going to school until next year." The return trip took no more than 4 minutes. Sitting in the cab, Jason couldn't see any streets or stops. He looked at his own reflection in the side mirror and remembered how he'd once stood under the windows of a college dormitory with a huge bouquet of white roses. A small, fragile girl who seemed to him the most beautiful in the world had come out to him then. "Or are those for me?" She looked happily at the flowers. Yes, Jason reminded himself. They stood there under curious stares from the windows in the fine rain, but there was no way they could part. And then he'd gone to study abroad, and they'd been lost. "Where have you been so long? And where's the bouquet?" Emily interrupted his musings abruptly. Resentment was simmering inside her. They hadn't finished the photo shoot, but they should have already left for the restaurant. The flowers were gone, and he hadn't even thought to buy other ones. Only the faces of the guests surrounding her stopped her from making a scandal. The boy ran away and hid somewhere. "I haven't found him," her husband answered her absent-mindedly. "Are you out of your mind?" Giving vent to her anger, Emily hissed. "You've been gone for half an hour." Shh. Emily, it's okay. Daddy and I are going to go and get another bouquet. In the meantime, go to the restaurant." Her mother tried to calm her down. "But why should you miss the celebration now?" continued to get upset daughter. "Nothing," we quickly assured the parents and went to the car. The day for the bride was hopelessly ruined. She had so carefully thought out everything, tried so hard, and then some stupidity ruined everything. All the resentment was directed not at the boy who had stolen the flowers for some reason, but at her husband who had acted so foolishly, and now stands in front of her with such an indifferent look, as if it does not concern him at all. "What's the matter with you?" she whispered to him when everyone had dispersed and the newlyweds were at a separate, beautifully decorated table. "I'm fine. You know how tiring these events are for me, don't you?" At some point, the banquet moved from the building to the street, or rather, to the cozy, spacious courtyard of the restaurant. Jason hadn't noticed Emily changing her dress to a more comfortable outfit. She posed for pictures, smiling feignedly, hugging her parents and friends, laughing, asking for more champagne, but keeping a glance at her husband. The whole show was played for the guests. A heavy feeling grew inside that something was wrong. Jason had made some jokes about her preparations, not a lot of initiative, but tonight he'd been too distant. Dusk had fallen on the city. The cool of the evening, the lights came on. The guests scattered around the grounds. Some were chatting at tables, some were dancing, some were swinging on the big swings. Ahead of them was still waiting for a huge cake, which the newlyweds had to cut together. Then tea, dancing, Bengal lights, and final photos together. Emily stepped away from Mom and Dad and looked around absent-mindedly. Jason was nowhere to be found. Pretending to walk from one guest to another, Emily tried to figure out where her husband had gone. He was standing on the small terrace overlooking the river, leaning on the parapet. "It's beautiful," he said, without looking at the girl. The city glowed below, the red sunset and street lights reflected in the water. "Yes," Emily answered automatically. "Let's go to the guests." He was upset for some reason and looked at her with an annoyed look. "Let's go," she smiled again, deciding to deal with it later. The rest of the evening went beautifully. Beautiful music, a gorgeous white and red cake that everyone was smitten with, a spectacular and concluding part of the event, a joint photo. But as soon as the guests left, there was silence. The celebration was abruptly turned off. Music was playing. The noise of the city came from the half-opened window, but there was a heavy silence between them. Emily took offense at the day's events. Jason, on the other hand, saw the boy hiding behind the closet. After a week, the relationship mended. Work, household chores, visits. In the hustle and bustle of everyday life, the thoughts dissipated. Spoiled holiday seemed now not so bad, especially since friends, relatives, and colleagues were satisfied. On the weekend, she had a chance to visit the house that had been on her mind. Emily decided to have a reunion with her friends outside of town at some new fancy salon. Jason was happy to approve the idea. He had about 5 hours to make the trip and drive back. He caught Jason in the yard trying to ride a small bicycle without pedals. The neighborhood was empty. The playground was overgrown with grass, the paths were cracked, and the wall of a large, unfinished house blocked it from the other yards. Jason looked around. It was depressing and eerie to see a child in a wasteland of old, dilapidated buildings. Hi, he greeted the boy cheerfully. What's the matter with your bike? It's falling apart, he replied shortly and clearly. And then he was shy, apparently deciding that he had said it too boldly. That's too bad, Jason sighed. Drop it, and let's see what I brought you. The boy's eyes lit up, but then he remembered his fear again and continued to stand still. Well, come on, take the present as soon as you can. Is this for me forever? Jason asked incredulously. Forever for you, he nodded. I'll leave it here. I'm going to go see your grandmother. Jason walked into the driveway and watched from the dirty window as the boy paused, looked toward the house, and rushed to unseal the box. Inside was a big blue machine with a remote control. If anyone knew what a child who had received no more than a couple of presents in his 6 years felt at that moment, they would understand. It was a real feeling of happiness. Jason watched the scene in the yard with a satisfied look and went upstairs. Grandma opened the door, inviting him inside. The room felt cleaner. The same wedding bouquet still stood in a vase on the window. Won't let me throw it away, Grandma explained. They'd met. Her name was Rachel. She had lived in this house for 40 years, and now it was recognized as an emergency, and soon she and her grandson were to move. But so far there was no news, and they, along with a few neighbors, were staying there. Of course, I realized that it's already getting dangerous here, and Jason will need to go to school. His classmates will make fun of him for living in a slum. But I'm so attached to this house in my heart. My husband and I lived here, and Ashley was born here, she said as she looked around the walls. How does she write? Jason took the opportunity to ask. Yes, she sends a letter once a month. We read it together with my grandson. Then we write a reply. Who's his father? I don't know. Someone took care of his daughter, came with flowers and gifts, but she wouldn't tell me. And then here was Jason. When she was put away, it was just the two of us. Ashley looked noticeably older than her years, and Jason looked a lot like his mom. Jason suddenly pictured her here, standing by the window or dusting the bookshelves. There was an unpleasant prickling in his chest. Bah, look, Jason said contentedly as he entered. He was still embarrassed to have a guest, but his joy was overflowing. Seeing the table full of goodies made him even more excited, and after half an hour, there was no trace of embarrassment left. As he walked out, Jason felt a cozy warmth spread through his body. It was strange, but this old house, with its empty windows gaping in the evening light, no longer seemed like a haven for alcoholics and homeless people. Even a place like this, it turned out, could be nicer to be in than his stylish apartment with its whitewashed ceiling, which still smelled pleasantly new. He patted his hand lightly on his pants pocket, where a small bag contained a few blonde hairs he discreetly removed from his comb. Waiting for the test results had taken several agonizing days. The moment he was handed the cherished envelope seemed to turn everything in his life upside down. A son. He had a son. How to live with that now? What to do? Thoughts swirled in his head, interrupting each other. Son, wow, Jason, look at that. Do you like it? Someone's voice broke into thought. Emily was standing in front of him with an open sketchbook that flaunted several kitchen options. What? I don't understand, he asked. Well, look. Do you like this one? The girl pointed her finger at one of the pictures. I don't care. Pick it yourself, her husband replied without looking. You don't care? I don't understand. Jason, what's going on? Are we living together or what? Emily, I don't care about the kitchen right now, especially since you're going to do as you please anyway. She hummed resentfully and withdrew. Jason was glad she did, though. He really didn't care about the household chores in the apartment or his wife's outfits. He wasn't ready to discuss the matter with her, imagining her reaction in advance. Trips to see his son had become regular, but he didn't know how to start a conversation about their kinship. In the fall, Jason decided to go to Ashley's colony, not even knowing why or what he would do afterward. He was determined to find her. According to Rachel's story, he had another 6 months left to serve. The prison building was in a neighboring town. The gray and gloomy red brick structure had no windows on the outside and was surrounded by a high stone fence with barbed wire on top. Jason was let through the checkpoint and escorted to the supervisor's office. "I was told you were here to see Ashley Fedorova," a stout older man in a uniform asked him. "Yes, can I see her?" "No, unfortunately," the man stretched out. Why, Jason asked confidently, ready to use his money and all his assertiveness, but the answer stunned him. "Well, she died from tuberculosis. Buried here in our cemetery, but I can't let you in. Only relatives, and there are no relatives." So that's it. He was talking to himself while Jason sat back in his chair, hearing everything through a shroud of confusion and incomprehension. "How did she die?" he finally uttered. "Just like that," the warden said nervously. "Like all people die, so she. And what will you be to her? She only has a sick mother, right?" "Yes, the son, I think. You know so much about the families of prisoners. Don't lose your senses," asked the visitor. "Well, I have to. It's just a job," he explained with a wave of his hands. As Jason struck that blow, he didn't know how to tell Rachel and the boy what had happened. The child had waited so long for his mother, kept all the gifts he'd prepared for her in his locker in the form of cards and drawings. It would be cruel to announce her death to him, but holding back wasn't the best idea either. Anyway, the difficult moment was postponed and postponed. Emily became nervous, getting worked up over anything, whether it was things left in the wrong place or a missed phone call. Several times her husband was ready to tell her what was going on in his life, but for some reason, every time she started talking about money, fashion, and her friends' personal lives, the urge was gone. Jason was pretty sure she wouldn't understand him. What's more, it would make her jealous. Rachel had been sick for a long time and had gotten used to her condition, but now she was not feeling well at all. When Jason arrived, he found his son at his first-floor neighbor's house. The grandmother was taken to the hospital. When he arrived and entered her room, he noticed at once how much she had changed. A thin, pale face, trembling hands. The nurse had warned him that the patient was too weak to talk, but seeing how pleased she was, she let him stay and left. "What about you, Rachel?" Jason asked affectionately. "I wanted to see my grandson off to first grade, but I don't think I'm going to make it," she said. "You'll make it. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. And you'll be fine." "Jason, I didn't forget. No, I need to talk to you now before it's too late." "What about?" "I know there's a reason you're here." "Yes, you're right." Jason was unprepared for this conversation, frantically searching for words. "Your son," the woman guessed. "Yes, he is." Jason sighed. "Well, that's good. Please don't leave him when I'm gone." "What are you talking about? It'll be all right. Promise," Rachel insisted. "I promise," he gave in. They hugged goodbye, and Jason left, determined to return again as soon as work allowed. But that was the last time they'd see each other, because a couple days later the hospital told him his grandmother had died. The boy was confused to learn that his grandmother was gone. It was the second scariest day of his life after his mom was taken away by uniformed men. He ran to his room, climbed onto the couch, and huddled in a corner. His father sat beside him, wondering if he should tell him now about something he should have done a long time ago. "Jason, I know how hard this is for you," he began, and he heard the boy sobbing softly. "But there's something I have to tell you. Do you understand? I'm not a stranger to you." "I guess that a long time ago," the boy said as he continued to cry. "You did? I'm sorry I didn't tell you right away. I was afraid. In case you didn't want to talk to me." The boy stood up and looked at his father with eyes red from tears. "Can I give you a hug?" Jason asked. The boy nodded. He hugged his son for the first time and felt him cling to him tightly. He shuddered, breathing deeply, clutching at his father's coat. Something had to be done right away. "I can't take you away right now," Jason said with difficulty. He felt small hands gripping the edges of his clothes tighter. "But it's temporary. I'll do the paperwork and pick you up right away, okay?" It was unbearably sad to leave him. Of course, it wasn't the paperwork, it was Emily who had to be prepared. At least the neighbor was a good woman who'd known the boy since he was a baby. Jason involved several lawyers he knew in his case, so that everything could be resolved as quickly as possible without sending the child to an orphanage. They assured him that the case would be resolved as needed. There are no other relatives, no one to claim custody. The only thing that matters is that the wife is okay with it. The wife. Here's the hardest part of the case. The mom didn't cry, or become hysterical, or numb, or scold the men, or pity her daughter touchingly. She behaved in her usual manner. Sitting down opposite, she reached across the table and stroked Violet's palm. "Violet, it's for the best that you saw his true face," she said. "They're like that nowadays anyway, dumped sooner or later, even in the hardest moments of life. If it hadn't been for Deborah, someone else would have come along. Be glad you won't have to regret the time and effort you wasted. Come on, honey, let's make lemon cookies for ourselves." "Mom, are you kidding me? What cookies? I can't breathe," Violet sobbed. Mom just let her sob, looking on with understanding and concern. She waited patiently for the tears to dry up, and then she brought a glass of water and said, putting her arm around Violet's shoulders, "It really helps a great deal in such cases to do something familiar and ordinary. Of course, except for unpleasant chores like cleaning and washing dishes. I can't stand both. Although I love cooking and can create a culinary miracle from the simplest and cheapest products. I hate to wash dishes and make clean without any caprice," sincerely informed the mother of her fans. And the frightened lovers of free coziness quickly disappeared. Violet didn't work out like Mom. She didn't know how to stand up for herself, so they took everything away from her. So they took Max. That's what she should do. 6 months ago, Violet had a happy accident. She was in the right place at the right time, and her humble life miraculously changed. She had just graduated from teachers' college and came to work in a kindergarten. Many old acquaintances were surprised by Violet's unfashionable choices. She studied well at school, without any special efforts, and could have chosen a more prestigious and profitable specialty. Only her mother, grandmother, and friend Deborah were not surprised. They knew that Violet loved babies, and babies adored her. Since Violet herself had had time to grow out of toddlers your age, hadn't she? And there's no point in resisting the calling. Of course she won't stop at college. She'll combine her major with work. Violet was given a junior group of 15 3-year-olds, 10 of them boys, and half of them hyperactive. It's a roller coaster ride of a shift. Her magical ability to calm children will definitely come in handy here. The 5 tiny girls in Violet's group were amusingly different from each other. 2 princesses, 2 shy, thoughtful. And Tara slid down the roof of the children's slide like a monkey, or twirled around in a pretty dress, or looked at flowers, beetles, and butterflies, trying to remain almost invisible. The little girl herself was neither battered nor intimidated. She was just cozy enough to ponder alone. After watching her teacher for a couple days, Tara decided that she could be trusted, and when she felt like it, she showed her findings or drawings. She loved to draw. Violet couldn't help it. She had grown attached to the little girl and loved her more than anyone else. Her mother usually came to fetch Tara, a small, graceful blonde, a little older than her teacher, gentle, polite, and not verbose. She seemed to be an enlarged copy of her little daughter. She raised the child alone and often looked sad and tired. According to the headmistress, they lived in threes: Tara, her mother, and grandmother. but the grandmother had not yet been seen in the kindergarten. They gossiped in the kindergarten that she was against Tara's birth, persuaded her daughter to have an abortion, and now she did not help in raising the little girl on principle. Violet felt even more sympathy for the girl. She herself had grown up without a father, but she had never doubted the love and care of her mother and grandmother during her childhood. Violet could have grown up distrustful, wary, but her mother's easygoing nature got in the way. Mama was convinced that most people weren't bad. They're just very different, and that's why there's misunderstanding between them. It was Violet's third month at the daycare center. One day, instead of Mama Mia, a sturdy, charming brown-haired man of about 25 came to pick up Tara. He was energetic, tanned, with gray-blue eyes and a bright, self-assured smile. Violet thought he realized the impression he'd made on the young educator, and it was a shame. Had Tara's father remembered her? She thought, but in an instant she realized no, it was not her father, but her mother's brother. And she said out loud, "I can't give my child to a stranger. It's for the safety of the children entrusted to us. Tara's mom didn't tell me someone else was coming for her." "No problem," the stranger apologized generously. He pulled out his cell phone, made a call, and said into the receiver, "Mia, here is the most beautiful Mary Poppins me baby does not give me the baby. Talk to her in your own voice that I'm not a stranger." And he put Violet on the phone. "Violet, it's me, Mia." "Violet, it's me, Mia." It's Tara's mom's voice. "I'm sorry I forgot to warn you yesterday. My brother Max is here, and I asked him to pick up Tara so I wouldn't have to run from work." As tanned Violet knew, Mia's accountant has a strict boss who would rather stay late at work than leave early. Sometimes all the kids are already picked up, and Violet and Tara are still walking alone on the playground, waiting for their mom. It's good that Mia will get some rest, and Tara won't feel bad that she's the last one to be picked up, and for some reason it's very unpleasant that the young man is not Tara's dad. Though that doesn't mean he doesn't have kids of his own. Why should she care about that anyway? "Thank you for your vigilance," said the guy with a mock serious look. "Can you be trusted? Come, uncle, little girl, let's go home." At the exit, he turned around with the girl in his arms. "My name is Uncle Max." "Goodbye, Uncle Max." Violet said goodbye with a restrained smile and forced herself to turn around and walk from the locker room to the group. Don't let him think he impressed her. She sees uncles like that every day. It's so commonplace, and his smile is Hollywood. Like an ad man or a salesman. It's embarrassing. Anyway, it didn't work out for Violet. She kept thinking about Tara's uncle all evening, and the next day he came for her niece again. The usually cautious, reserved Tara ran to him, spreading her arms. "Uncle, pardon me for asking," Violet ventured to ask. "Is everything all right with Mia?" "Everything's fine," Uncle Max assured her. "I just thought I'd relieve my little sister. While I'm here, at least let her live without the daily evening races to the kindergarten. I'm out of contract, so I came to my folks for a vacation. I don't know how it's gonna go." He was probably waiting for Violet to ask him something about who he worked for, where he worked. But Violet only nodded and said, "Okay, I see." And then she felt how stupid and boring it sounded. "Oh, I almost forgot." He slapped himself lightly on the forehead and held out a box of expensive candy. "These are for you." Violet and her mom used to get them on holidays. "Thank you." She was surprised. "What are the gifts in honor of?" "In honor of our acquaintance," the boy smiled. The next day he brought 5 large cherry roses. Tara was jumping up and down, happy with her favorite teacher's gift. Violet didn't have time to find the right word. The uncle picked up his niece, promised to come back tomorrow, and walked out the door of the group. Violet, after some thought, took the flowers home and told her mother about her new acquaintance. Anyway, he's not a cheapskate, Mom laughed lightly, admiring the bouquet. The flowers are gorgeous. Now, so many men do not give flowers. Even funny to say, they consider women mercantile for the desire to get a bouquet or a cup of coffee in a beautiful coffee shop. They draw stupid conclusions. Yes, I will always support a man in difficult moments, do not reproach. I will share all the hardships, but I do not intend to do it for a known bogeyman. One good thing is that you can see them right away. Oh, I'm distracted. Mom loved lyrical digressions, as she called them. She didn't share the details of her personal life with Violet, but she was happy to think out loud and you could more or less understand what she was going through. Haley had a happy streak. She was always interested in life, even if it wasn't going well. It was probably what made her look younger than her years and all of her classmates. Despite her modest income, she didn't hover in the clouds, but just a little soaring above reality. Do you seem surprised and confused? She asked Violet. Why would I be? The usual. A young man has decided to court you in the classic way. That's not a bad thing, as long as he's not married. I don't advise you to get involved with married men. You're so pretty, Violet. Girls have been guessing that since they were little. You don't seem to have any doubts, do you? With a modest smile, she added. Just a piece of antique window dressing. A modest beauty. My mother always managed to make me feel confident that everything would be all right. The next day, Max came to visit again. He took out of the inner pocket of his jacket 2 rectangles of theater tickets. Let's go to the theater on Saturday, he suggested. Really, I'm just asking if you'd like to go out with me, Violet. We could try, Violet said. It's a really good theater. Saturday night, Deborah popped out, caught Violet packing. Wow, she said, her eyes widening in amusement. Are you putting on a case? Did something unusual happen? My best friend doesn't know. Haley hummed and disappeared somewhere. Violet was a little confused. Her friend could guess what was going on, even in the middle of nowhere. And here was such physical evidence. Haley sewed at home. She could use ready-made patterns or custom orders, coordinated down to the smallest detail. She could use her own imagination when the customer didn't know what she wanted. Clients were very different. They paid not only in money, but also primitive natural exchange, as Mom called it. The sewing of a strict business suit was partially paid for by a piece of artificial tie silk from one client. Haley hadn't been warned of this turn of events. She was counting on the full amount in cash. She and Violet were just going through another rough patch. That was Haley's expression, too. That's what she called periods of no money. But Violet's times were the same, and she hoped to get out of them by going to the interview in the suit Haley and Pasha had made and getting her dream job. Will pay, but it'll do. Haley agreed, looking at the narrow piece of smooth, navy-colored fabric. And 2 days later, they sewed Violet an elegant new suit, and her daughter a simple, elegant dress. Coco Chanel had a little black one, Haley announced, and Violet will have a little turquoise one. It suits the brown girl. Mom, but it's a masterpiece. Violet exhaled sincerely, wrapping herself twice in her new clothes in front of the mirror. But now I have to think up where to wear it so as not to offend him. Oh, if there was a dress, there would be occasions, Haley assured her. Deborah had tried to borrow a dress once. She'd counted on it, but it was tailored to Violet's exact measurements. I'll be sure to sew something to fit your tantalizing thighs, Haley comforted Violet, and the dress waited in her closet. Deborah looked at Violet now and made a quick judgment. Let's just say you haven't had time to tell me what's new, but now you're just not going to get away with it. Nothing much has happened, or you'd be the first to know. Violet assured me, and it was true. Violet and Deborah had been friends since kindergarten, ever since Deborah's parents had come to town and put her in preschool. No one could explain why such different girls had become such good friends. but they had never even quarreled once. Somehow there was no reason. Deborah's self-love, named after her grandmother, suited her rare name Deborah very well. There was something icy about it. If their school had a casting call for the role of the Snow Queen, Deborah would definitely be chosen. And no one could blame her for anything. She wasn't angry with anyone. She didn't fight with anyone. She didn't gossip about anyone. Deborah wasn't perfect. She just had little interest in other people. For a select few, she made an exception, and among them was her childhood friend Violet. Haley was very pleased with their friendship. In her opinion, the compassionate Violet with her gentle charm was a wonderful influence on her daughter. Violet had been told this with a smile by her own mother. That's what she said. I'm quoting you. Almost exactly. But I know you're a good person without her. Deborah wasn't so easy to get away from. I had to tell her about Theron. What an uncle. To think of it, said Deborah. I personally talked you out of working at the kindergarten. And do you remember one of the main arguments? Yes, I do, laughed Violet, pulling her blue suede shoes out of the box. It's boring because you don't meet anyone. It's all moms and grandmas. I'm going to admit I'm wrong, Deborah said. You introduced me to him. You know I'm realistic, and I'll tell you what your Uncle Theron's breathing. He's not mine at all, Violet said. We're not rushing things yet. We've only just met, and we're just going to the theater. Maybe the man left his hometown a long time ago and has no friends left here, no one to go out with. And I thought you'd be interested in my opinion, Deborah said. If I had someone, I'd introduce you right away. And by the way, he could take his sister to the theater. And he's taking you. By the way, what does he do? A petroleum engineer. He used to work in the north, on shifts. Now he doesn't want to work anymore. He's looking for something with a regular schedule and closer to civilization. He's not poor, I guess, Deborah remarked. Tania, are you sure you're not married? Isn't there a Yakut woman waiting for him in a yurt in the far north? I know Yakutia, Violet grinned. It's given to you. Just tell you something. And so it went. In fact, it was fortunate that Deborah came in while Violet was giggling, wondering if she looked good enough. While you're waiting for a meeting, you realize that your fears of appearing boring are useless and silly. And still you think about it like ants running around. When Max called, Violet was long gone. They were sitting in the kitchen, Haley knitting and drinking coffee and chocolate chip cookies. Violet was just waiting and trying to appear casual. I'll be right out, she promised into her cell phone and looked out of the fourth-floor window into the street. Deborah followed. Audi, she stated. I wonder if it's a credit car. Everything was going great. Classic, as Haley would define it. After a few years of working in the north, Max had planned a 2-month vacation with his family. Then he had plans for Moscow, especially since it wasn't far away. 2 years ago, he had already bought a studio on the outskirts and had been renting it out all this time. Now they would ask the tenants to vacate the apartment for the landlord. He would live and look for a job in Moscow. By the end of the 2nd month in his hometown, Max made one more item in his plans. One Saturday night, he unexpectedly came to visit with a bouquet and a cake. He met my mom and immediately announced, Haley, I have serious intentions. I want to marry Violet. I'll be honest with you. We'll have to wait. I need to find a job in Moscow that will allow me to provide for my family. I'm used to good wages in the north and to civilization. It's harder to find such a salary. If I don't find it yet, I'll go back on shift. I need a bigger apartment for my family instead of a studio. I see an active man, Max, and that's not a bad thing, Haley said. But I'm guessing this is the first time Violet has heard about your plans together. It was the plain truth. Violet was caught off guard, and she wasn't good at pretending. In those 2 months, she had fallen so self-consciously in love that everything else in her life had taken a back seat, seemed unimportant. She felt so good that she was afraid to think of the future, lest she jinx it with her plans. Violet had never been superstitious before, but now she was. She dared to look only very far into the fact that Max was going to Moscow. They would call each other. He would start coming for the weekend, as he had promised. She would wait and rush the weekend. How long it would last, she tried not to think. "I wanted to talk to both you and Violet at once," Max said. "Violet, will you be my official fiancée?" "I agree," Violet said. It wasn't how she'd imagined it, but she was still very happy. She wanted to hug Max, but she was shy in front of Haley. He, too, was sitting there as solemn as a principal at a banquet. "I'll bring the ring back from Moscow." "There's no good jewelry store here," Max said. "I'm sorry this was so awkward." "We understand that not everything can be calculated and planned," Haley reassured him. "A spontaneous decision isn't always worse than a well-considered one." "Was I lucky to have a mother-in-law?" Max exclaimed. "Your mother-in-law sure is," assured Haley, "and I'm all for total non-interference." "Yes, Mom, she really is," Violet confirmed. Her voice didn't even sound familiar. It was more melodic today because she was singing inside. Max could have gone to Moscow without this offer. She hadn't expected anything like that from him. It wouldn't even occur to her to take offense at his not promising anything. It turns out that he really cares for her, too. He wants her to know that he's serious on his part, and to wait for him. Being a bride makes the waiting somehow different, and it makes it so much easier for her to wait. And the next week, just before Max left, was her birthday. Max had booked a banquet at a cafe for the closest of her family. On Violet's side were Haley and Deborah. The groom came with his mom, his sister, and Tara. "Violet, you weren't ready to meet your future mother-in-law on her birthday, were you?" Deborah whispered to her. "Not really," Violet admitted. "But if that's what Max wants, I don't mind." "It's your birthday," Deborah reminded her. "I don't really keep track of." Violet remained in their arms. It was the first time she'd ever been to a party, even a small one. All her holidays had been celebrated at home and in the nursery. She looked with interest at the decorated table, the beautifully folded napkins. Evelyn, her mom, found an approach to Max's silent mom, and they talked about fabrics. Mom was generally good with all kinds of people, but she liked her privacy best. Mia, Max's sister, looked tired, but she tried to seem cheerful and lively, like a birthday party should be, praising Violet in front of her mom. "She really likes me, and she's so sweet," grateful Violet thought. Deborah wandered from table to bar to chat with the Chinese bartender who had inexplicably been blown into their town by the wind. This bartender, she moved gracefully across the banquet, showing off her beautiful legs. And the bartender should have been grateful. Patrons from the neighboring room began to pull up to the counter, clearly because of the blonde beauty unperturbed. "You and your friend don't look alike at all," Max's mom told Violet as she watched Deborah. "Of course we're not sisters." Violet laughed. She wanted to spend the evening alone with Max, but it's still nice. Tara's interesting. She'll probably spend a few days drawing everything she's memorized. Max gave Violet a new cell phone for her birthday, and 2 days later he left for Moscow, and the usual routine began. Violet tried her best to get away from work, to switch off. She even tried once again to learn from her mother the wisdom of cutting and sewing. "Are you missing me that much?" Haley asked understandingly. "Yeah," Violet said. "I didn't expect it. I thought those feelings were invented for novels to make them more interesting for women to read. I was sure I'd live in peace." "Wow, I'm sure she wasn't with your jeans," smiled Haley. "In consolation, I had strong feelings and I don't regret it at all. I'm glad I did." Max came every week at first, then every other weekend. Violet understood that it was hard to spend 12 hours on the road after a work week and then drive back a day later. Sometimes you just need to sleep at home without anyone interfering. On New Year's Eve, Max invited Violet to his place. He'd show her Moscow at the same time. Sometimes you need a change of scenery. Violet was careful to tell her mother. What would she say to that? Violet thought. "Violet, you really are old-fashioned," said Haley. "Do you think I'm going to talk you out of it?" "No, of course not. We're not in Victorian England, and you're not a schoolgirl. You're an independent adult. It's bound to happen at some point. I'm happy for you that it's not too soon and it's not the wrong way around. And love is important. Trust me on this." Violet believed her mom. She was sure, without proof, that her mother understood love. "Who are you going to spend New Year's Eve with?" "Yeah, are you going to Grandma Jordan's?" Once upon a time, the four of them had lived in this small apartment: Grandma, Grandpa, Mom, and Violet. Violet didn't remember Grandpa very well. He had died early, and Grandma had lived with them for a long time. 2 years ago, she had come from the market and told them from the doorstep that she had met an elderly gentleman who had selflessly helped her carry potatoes and other vegetables home. She wouldn't have bought so many if the gentleman hadn't come along. She decided to take advantage of the opportunity, said Grandma. Grandma's acquaintance turned out to be a resident of a neighboring town. He had a house in the private sector, where he lived alone. His children lived and worked in Moscow and rarely came to visit. His wife had died a few years ago. Jordan had come here for a friend's anniversary, and now he promised to visit more often, Grandmother said coquettishly. Violet and her mom laughed and forgot about it the next day. Jordan wasn't kidding. He came to see Grandma, and one day she asked her girls for permission to bring him to visit. But Jordan and I aren't college students. We can't go out to restaurants. He tries to take me out for tea and cakes, but in our cafeteria at the supermarket will not sit for hours, said Grandma. And we're not interested in the movies. We want to socialize. Of course, Haley and Violet invited Jordan. He turned out to be a nice man. This former physics teacher, a man of rare manhood, he introduced himself, chuckling. He was no longer teaching at the school, but he ran some kind of technical club for children at the local house of culture. It was obvious that he adored his grandmother. He didn't hide it, didn't conceal it. Violet thought it was a little strange at the time, but Haley said she was just young and inexperienced. 6 months later, Grandma and Jordan decided to move in together. Violet and Haley were invited to visit Jordan's house so they could be assured that Grandma would live in decent conditions. The house was really quite nice and even well maintained. Jordan could do everything himself, including the women's housework. I'm putting my grandmother in good hands, Haley said. I'll get to Grandma Jordan's, Haley answered Violet's question. A good friend invited me to the cottage for New Year's Eve too, to be honest. I just wouldn't have gone if you'd stayed home. I'd rather be with you. I'll have a romantic New Year's Eve too. Maybe. So thank you. Daughter. Have fun in Moscow. Violet and her mom laughed together. My mom is a great mom, Violet thought. Deborah is jealous. You can't talk to her mother. You have to choose your words all the time. You can't say inappropriate things. One must always be decent. You have to live by the rules, even the rules your mom doesn't follow. She likes to say, when you're as old as me, you can do whatever you want. A young girl should behave herself. Where does she get these outdated views? Nobody thinks like that anymore, just her. Your mom cares what you think and feel, and mine cares that no one can say anything bad about me. That's how we live. I could understand it if I were to be married to a millionaire or a sultan, Violet said. Sultans are millionaires too. Aha, continued Deborah, who was not easily diverted from her course. So I say, there's no point in looking to public opinion. Nobody thinks about us. and in fact talk for 2 minutes and forget it. Everybody's busy living their own lives. I'm still in the habit of acting the way I used to, although I'm not under any illusions about meeting a millionaire. Casper, the owner of the hardware store in the basement, is probably my ceiling. Violet didn't hide from Deborah that she sympathized with poor Casper. He'd been a devoted admirer of her friend for almost 4 years, ever since he'd seen Deborah in a long dress at the prom she'd gone to with Violet. But while to someone like Violet's grandmother Casper was a decent, serious guy, and even a successful businessman, to Deborah he was plain, boring, and rude. But he didn't realize it, because although she argued with her mother, she behaved properly and didn't speak frankly. Violet went to Moscow for New Year's Eve, and she had never had a happier New Year. Not even in her childhood, when Max had shown her the capital on New Year's Day, and in the evening they had returned to his little studio and been alone. "I haven't made any friends here yet. I only work," Max said. "On weekends I either go to Violet's hometown or just relax and watch TV series if I'm too tired." Violet would wake up in the middle of the night and look over at him. They'll definitely have friends in Moscow when they start living together. They will make a very cozy life. It will be nice to visit them, she thought. Violet helped pick out presents for Max's mother and sister and for Tara, and she was also supposed to drive them. She was a little surprised that Max didn't want to go to his family's house by himself. "We could spend half the vacation in Moscow and half at home," Violet suggested. "Violet, I'm right here at home. What's there to do there? Where would you and I meet like this?" "I don't think we'd get to spend so many nights together," Max replied. "My mom and I aren't really close. If you've noticed, I love her, of course. But we don't have much to talk about. Mia likes to whine. She gave birth to Theru. No one forced her to. And now it's like it's someone else's fault that she's having a hard time. Of course, I feel sorry for her, but feeling sorry makes you tired." "You're just tired." Violet hastened to justify him. She would find something to say to his mother and Mia. She would think of something to make them feel good. Everyone gets tired sometimes, even those closest to them. True, Violet couldn't remember her and her grandmother or her mother ever getting so tired of each other, but men must be different. Sometimes you have to leave them alone so they have time to miss you. She knows too little about that yet. "I wonder how Mom is doing," when she wished them a happy new year. Her voice was carefree and happy. Tanya sometimes thought Mom was the same age as her Violet thought. The New Year's Eve festivities were over. The usual dark southern routine was back. The calendar hinted at spring, but they didn't believe in it. Max visited Violet and his family less often, in 2 weeks or even 3. Violet understood, or seemed to understand. But she was restless, anxious. Nights of wind, knocking on the windows, and insomnia. It seemed to Violet that it was bad news knocking at the house that was kept from her during the day. Weekends without Max seemed long and useless. Deborah had somehow become a little distant. She had her own things to do. She had even stopped asking for details. Slowly, Violet became friends with Mia, Max's sister. The soft-spoken Mia came to visit with her daughter, Tara. They drank strong tea with a spoonful of homemade herbal balm, a gift from Jordan's grandmother, and Mom would read a book to Tara or play with her. It was a little funny and very unusual for someone to address Mommy as Baba Haley, but it didn't make Mommy sad at all. Baba is a child's confidence level. Stupid girls. The girls weren't so stupid. They understood. Violet was pleased that Mia and Tara were visiting them often. It was like Max was getting so much closer, and Max would say every time they called, "Thank you for taking care of my girls." Violet's mom always encouraged them to pop in and out more often, and Max's mom was slow to invite them over. "She's such a person." Violet's own mom would reassure Violet. "And by the way, it was for the best. She's probably not interested." And she doesn't need to know everything about you, to watch you, to control you, to find things out. It'll be easier for you if you ever get married. Mama said it in good faith, without innuendo or double meaning. But Violet still didn't like it. If and someday. Is anything else ambiguous, she thought. After their promises and arrangements and all the wonderful things between them, it was springtime, when it was still cold in the morning without gloves, but the parks were already filled with pale green smoke from buds barely bursting on the trees. Violet had been sent to New York for a scholarly conference for child care providers and educators. Perhaps some of the family child care providers would have liked a change of scenery and a trip to New York. But the head sent a free Violet, who sympathized with her very much a young and responsible specialist, for all the time of work without conflicts with the parents of pupils. In addition, just an fiancé in New York, to see each other. Violet decided to go without calling as a surprise. They hadn't seen each other in over 2 weeks. A surprise visit would make her even happier. Mia, please don't tell your brother I'm coming. I want to show up out of the blue, surprise him. Mia was silent, a little hesitant, and then asked, Are you sure, Violet? Wouldn't it be better if we warned him? Do you think your brother would be angry if he saw me? He's the one who keeps saying he misses me. I don't ask him to. Yes, you're right, don't mind him. Yes, you're right. As my mom likes to say, I'm just very attentive. The conference started on Monday, and Violet arrived in New York on Sunday night. It's a long way from the subway to Max's house. What about a cab? She had so many homemade pies and pickles with her, and she wanted to take a little breather from the road and look pretty for Max. Violet paid the driver and got out of the cab at the corner of the house. There were roadworks, patches on the asphalt, and she had to walk a little. At Max's front door, a couple was saying goodbye. A girl in a light, unseasonable mini dress and a half coat thrown over her shoulders. She had shoulder-length pearlescent white, thick hair. She tiptoed and kissed the lips of a young man who lightly put his arm around her waist. The girl broke the kiss, but continued to stare at her companion. It was Max, slightly wrinkled and pleased with himself. Should I say hello to you in your chicken net? Violet heard a familiar voice, playfully melodic, almost flawless. What is she doing here? Deborah laughed softly, turned away from Max and faced Violet. One goes away and another comes, she said, not confused. But she didn't wait for an answer. Deborah walked away at what Violet and her mother called an underground pace. She had known her friend too long and too well. She was convinced that Violet would not follow her, would not be able to move. Violet's travel bags froze in her hands. She had to at least put them on the pavement to shake them off, but her fingers wouldn't bend, wouldn't obey. Max, as if nothing had happened, took hold of the handles of the bags and pulled them towards himself. Give them to me, and let's go home. Violet followed him obediently, as if in a fog. In the elevator, she stood looking at her feet or in the corner. She couldn't raise her eyes to Max, as if she were afraid of seeing someone else entirely. In the apartment, she sat down on the edge of a chair by the table, with her back to the disassembled sofa. Bunny, I didn't realize you were such a child as your charges in the younger group, Max addressed her condescendingly. It's not like you and I are pure physiology at all. We rarely see each other. I'm a healthy man, and I have needs. I was sure you understood that, and wouldn't come unannounced so as not to embarrass me and yourself. I would never have let you run into each other here if I had known. I am not afraid of your coming unannounced at any time, Violet replied. That's why I'm marrying you. You have all the qualities of a good husband. That pseudo-friend of yours is the kind of woman you'd love to spend time with. Only idiots marry them. But you're not an idiot. You want a homemaker who's easy to fool. You're not that kind of girl. You just want to establish yourself at the expense of others. At least make snide comments about those who are more fortunate. And you fell for it like a little girl. Yes, she gets leftovers, and she convinces herself that she's beaten someone. Violet listened to him, daring him to look up. He didn't think he was wrong. He saw himself as a gift, a prize to be fought over. I guess it was good to be like that as long as there were fools like Violet. She stood up and picked up a smaller bag from the floor. There's your other one, with the pies and the winter cooking. It's for a present. Max, with a conciliatory smile, blocked her path by the front door. Don't be silly, Violet. Where are you going for the night? A hotel. I have a government room booked. I'm here for a conference, not to catch you red-handed. Oh, we're so strict, we're practicing the abused wife. Let me through. Yes, go ahead, of course. What am I, a beast? When you stop, call me. Where are you staying and when will you be free? We'll go out after my work and your conference. He had a friendly smile. It was funny. He didn't even think to hide it, or even pretend to be remorseful. Violet didn't even have tears. It was like a stone had been placed on her chest. She decided not to call her mom. She wouldn't do anything to help, but she'd only get upset, think more silently, and open orders more slowly. At 7 p.m. The next day, when Violet had just gotten back to her room, Max called. Violet had agreed with herself yesterday that she would not answer the phone, but she broke her promise to herself. Different things happen. People change, realize something, and one night Max said, naming the address where to pick you up. He didn't doubt it at all. She realized that she'd overreacted. People don't change, you just get to know them better over time. But maybe he was only pretending to be so cynical. If he didn't care about Violet, he wouldn't have called. Now he'd take the opportunity to get rid of his annoying girlfriend? Why all the emails and cards, the calls, the gifts, the introductions to families? I mean, he loved her. She couldn't be wrong. She wasn't some gorgeous, unapproachable socialite to conquer her just out of ego. So she does love her. She just didn't know how to express it the way she wanted to. Max arrived quickly, brought a bouquet of white lilies, suggested going to the premiere of the comedy. He was the same as he'd always been before, joking confidently, opening the door in a friendly manner. Violet wondered if he was pretending, or if he really didn't see that she was frozen or petrified. Now he was laughing quietly at the movie, enjoying the evening. Violet didn't care much about what was happening on the screen or around her. Shall we go home? He suggested after the movie. Let's order delivery for dinner, a bottle of wine. Violet was silent. She remembered Nancy, the front door, the bed. I can't go there yet. You know it hurts. And you're not even apologizing. It's as simple as that. Just because I love you doesn't mean you can do this to me. Here we go. Max tossed back gloomily. It was all good, after all. And again, these rural pretensions. It's really your element. Kindergarten, you guessed the profession, said Max. He turned and walked slowly back to the car. Violet barely restrained herself from rushing after him. She was afraid. Even his back showed that he might be gone for good, and she couldn't do anything about it. She can't hold him back, make him regret what he's done, and apologize. She can't do anything, she's inept. Deborah was right. The third day of the conference was over. Violet was going home. Max never called. It was a good thing Mia's mom didn't call her, not to alarm her, but texted her on Messenger. It was easier to reply there that everything was fine. You can't hear the voice in the text. Before the train, Violet stopped to buy a small gift for Tara and went to the station. Only settled on a side shelf, slowly floated past the platform. The bell rang. Max ran into the vestibule, tripping over other people's legs stretched out into the passage, as if he couldn't answer it in the car. I thought it would be better to talk to you directly, so that there would be no misunderstandings, so that you wouldn't make up unnecessary things for yourself." Max's voice sounded soft and almost indifferent. For some reason, Violet remembered the Methodist at the conference, tired from the speech and the buffet. "You and I shouldn't be in a relationship." "I was wrong, I admit it. We're not right for each other. You're over-dramatizing life. You can get tired of it quickly. We'd both get bored. If I'm feeling it now, you know there's no point. You can keep the presents. Be happy. Say hello to mine. I'll stop by sometime." He said that, and then he dropped the call. That's what it's called, dropping it. That's Mom's calm, sad expression, Violet thought. I know Mom well. You knew this was going to happen, and you never said anything to me once. I'm like an old crow that just crows. I didn't like Max too much, but my opinion is my opinion. I'm entitled to be wrong, and I'm not rarely wrong. And why would I want to ruin the best moments of your life? Said Mia. It was good, wasn't it? Violet exhaled. Well, then everything's fine. There's nothing to regret. It was, and it will be. Not with him. Do all men look at it that way? Why do I even want to be in a relationship? Come on, don't generalize, Mia said. They're just as different as we are. What loyalty isn't everyone's cup of tea? It's true. Things happen in life. I do not judge anyone for a long time, but a kind, decent person behaves differently. If his girlfriend, especially his fiancée, catches him with someone else. Of course, when he loves her. Perhaps even if he doesn't love her anymore, it's still different. And you realize that. Sometimes a guy's an incorrigible red tape, but he's a good man. And in Max's case, it's not the cheating that matters. It's how he behaved afterwards. You got rid of a piece of shit daughter. Well, that's something to celebrate, isn't it? You've lost track of her friends, Mom Violet sighed. We haven't even had a single fight. Seriously. Ever since we were kids, we've all trusted each other. And now, even if I wanted to, I couldn't trust her in the smallest things. It's not an accident. She came to LA to see him. It's deliberate. Stella won't want to be in a relationship with me after her brother and I broke up. She's not a friend. Deborah wasn't a friend. She was just a hitchhiker. People like that are friends when it suits them. Not when it doesn't, they'll take a boot to the head and move on. No one to regret either. Stella is not a stupid girl, though her mother and brother think otherwise. She'll figure out who she wants to hang out with. If she distances herself from you, it's because she's embarrassed about her brother. It happens to people with a conscience. Someone else did something nasty, shame on you. When you went to work, Mom, could you just jump from one topic to another? Violet was used to it, but sometimes she couldn't keep up with her mother's thinking. Monday. Today is my day off, and tomorrow is a work day. After the conference, let's go out of town for the weekend, and if I'm lucky, I won't even be sad. A friend with whom I met New Year's Eve has a dacha in a magical place, almost in the middle of the forest. There are snowdrops in the sunny meadows. Mom, you've never introduced me to your friends, Violet said. Is it something serious? Just a man with whom I will gladly introduce you. His name is Leslie, that is on passport Alexei. And serious, not serious, a little bit of everything. In any case, I'm welcome to visit with my daughter, or with my mom, or with Jordan, in addition. There's a dog and 2 ginger cats. Oranges, tangerines. Let's go. It was Max's first vacation. He was so lucky he was going on vacation alone, without his wife. His wife, having received an invitation to the wedding of a girlfriend in Los Angeles, was excited. She packed up and flew off. She picked up speed from the very doorstep and didn't even offer her husband company for the sake of decency. You should have asked me, Max said. And I shook my head. There will be ours, our yoga class. You're not interested. And I deserve a vacation and total relaxation. And I want to see a real California wedding, a California mother-in-law and all the other highlights. And you can make up for it by going somewhere else. Does Dad know you need a vacation? Asked the wife and flew away happy and satisfied. It was even annoying that he's not jealous anymore. Letting her go on vacation alone, just to have fun without her husband. And after all, not so long lived together. Max married the daughter of the technical director of not the smallest company, in which he worked as a development engineer. They met at a summer corporate retreat, where employees could take one of their family members with them at will. There was a lot of people. Contests, fireworks, dancing to pops, all sorts of nonsense for the fun of office workers. But a bright, confident brunette approached him when he was bored at the bar on the open veranda. "What kind of cocktail would I like?" she asked. She wasn't exactly Max's type, but if she was showing interest, it was indecent to ignore the chance. Max ordered more cocktails, drinking potentially. "I'm going out for a quick minute," Roxy said after the dance. "Stay here, don't leave. While your lady goes to powder her nose, I'll tell you something," came the mocking voice of Peter's colleague over my shoulder, "so that you do not particularly scatter. That's our Sam's daughter, the one and only favorite. She doesn't want to work. She'll get it here, she'll die there. It's not my thing. She'll go and live in Florida, Hawaii, and then go back to learning new things. Daddy's a retrograde, and he wants to marry her off. She's going to be 30 soon. To him, that's the age for girls to worry about being single. I mean, it's not the best butterfly for your herbarium." Max managed to say a big thank you to Peter, only mentally. He grinned and disappeared into the crowd of colleagues, barely noticing that his companion was returning. If Max had any interest in Roxy, it had diminished with the news of her parentage. Better to play the right nerd, so that Roxy would get bored and switch to a more interesting subject. Violet could be seen to be a gambler. Max's game of nerdiness turned out well, even talented in some places. There was a reason he was in good standing with the company. But that damn Roxy liked him too. She preferred to think of herself as a romantic, but in fact she was determined, strong-willed, and tenacious. Max, who liked to set the tone in relationships and talk up girls, felt driven for the first time. Roxy had asked for his phone number after the corporate party, and she'd called him herself, never doubting that he'd welcome the call. She could call in the middle of the day and talk passionately about all the nonsense that girls usually had girlfriends for. When he was silent for a long time, patiently listening to this nonsense, she interrupted herself and asked, "Or are you not interested?" I didn't want to check what would happen if he answered not very much. All the more so because another alarm bell was ringing. Frances began to tell Max. He'd treated you well before as a promising, responsible employee. But in a human way, he looked at you the same way he looked at others. He didn't notice you much before the corporate party, but after the summer corporate party, he started to touch on non-work topics. We talked about cars and boats. Max was invited to a fishing trip in a narrow circle, in which revolved rather closed, serious Sam. There was a lot to think about. He seemed to be seen as a future son-in-law. His relationship with Roxy was a protracted candy bouquet. Max just didn't want to complicate his life for fear of repercussions. In the eyes of Roxy's parents, he clearly looked like a well-mannered, serious young man with moral fiber who needed more than just a bed. It would have been very funny if it wasn't happening to him. A week before fishing, Max raided several thematic sites and bought himself the right equipment and the right spinning, with which it is not ashamed to appear in a serious fishing community. He enjoyed fishing as a hobby, looking for the upside to his position, and this was the first thing that came to mind. In fact, he just wasn't planning on getting married just yet. He was quite happy with the advantages of a single life. But if he reconsidered his plans, everything was going very well. The second such chance for a guy from a small town and the most ordinary family may not be. Without the right acquaintances and favorable kinship, he expected only routine work and slow career growth. That is, if in the office with business trips, without a shift, and he didn't want a shift anymore. Max liked comfort. To be honest with himself, the prospect of marrying Roxy suited him just fine. Say the daughter of the head of the security department, gray with a heavy chin, and the look of a school vice principal would be a really dull option. Roxy is bright, draws male attention to herself, and overall she's a good-natured, cheerful girl, if you don't look at the little things. Max was well aware of what confused him the most. He couldn't stand feminists and seriously believed that most women's woes are from their influence. Max makes the money and dictates the rules. He envisioned his wife as a pretty, gentle girl who owed him a lot and recognized his supremacy. He had once had one almost 3 years ago in his hometown. It seems it was in another life. Violet's kindergarten teacher is a cozy, naive girl. He actually almost married her. Thought she was just the right fit. If I'd gotten my hands on her friend who entertained for money, the hunter's appetite kicked in and my girl was in the wrong place at the wrong time and saw us, and walked around with such a reproach in her eyes and seriously waiting for repentance. Although before she had obeyed without question, Max recalled. He saw the snake lurking in a quiet pool and changed his mind about getting married. Max achieved everything himself, not to have his standards imposed on him, and now here we are. He's definitely not going to live by his own rules. Max still hadn't decided overnight from Friday to Saturday what line of behavior to take at the informal meeting. Francis, his 2 friends, and his cousin greeted Max cordially and did not show their superiority. Late in the evening, as the company drank and dined in a cozy rented cottage, Sam called Max to the terrace and bluntly asked, "Are you serious with Roxy? Just explain honestly, man to man, I'll understand." "I love your daughter, Sam," Max declared. "Whatever happens." "Why are you stalling?" "She's waiting. It's just a fashion for girls to be independent. But they're really waiting for a man to take the initiative. You know that without me, you're not a boy anymore." "I realize that I am not yet able to provide her with the standard of living to which she is accustomed," Max justified himself. "I'm afraid I'm not up to it. I don't want to look like a cunning provincial Alfonso. It's not for me. I realize that Roxy deserves someone more successful." "So what? We're so proud," Sam snorted. "Okay, I hear you. I get it. Now I'll tell you, my daughter has my personality. We don't care that you're not rich. It'll all come. You just have to want it. Do you have it?" "I can see that, and I'll help you," Sam said. "I care about my daughter's happiness, not what other people think. I don't work like an ox for myself. When you have kids of your own, you'll understand. Roxy never wanted to get married. She just waved it off. But she wants to marry you. So don't hesitate, and don't hesitate to propose. Your mother and I will throw you any kind of wedding you want. 300 people, or just the 2 of us in the Maldives." "Thank you for your understanding, Sam. Just as long as everything works out," Max replied. And that's how Max got married. Olivia didn't want a big celebration. "Weddings are just for drunken guests and hackneyed plots," she said. Max was grateful to her. First, he was bored with crowded gatherings. Secondly, he realized that his mother and Mia would look unrepresentable against the background of well-groomed, carefree friends and peers of the bride. Poor, simple-minded relatives of a provincial boy. And without a lavish wedding, there is no show of one's humble kin. Max called home and announced that he was getting married. They will go on a wedding trip, and then sometime come to visit with gifts. Since then, Max never got around to stopping by, not even by himself. Mom came to visit a couple of times at their new apartment. She liked her daughter-in-law sociable, friendly, energetic. son listens to her, and he is very much in favor of control. You can see that, Mom said to Max. He even listened calmly, did not object. His wife was really a good influence on him. Sister Mia never came once. Olivia gave her sister the usual greetings. When I call home, tell her I hope to see her and get to know her better, she told Max. Olivia was easy to get along with, as long as she didn't contradict her. She turned out to be smart, observant. Max had to say goodbye to all his girlfriends and not make any new ones. Max's day was scheduled by the minute, so it would be extremely difficult for him to carve out time for anything but Olivia's work and her approved hobbies like fishing with her dad. By the way, Max had really gotten into fishing. Sam was a tough strategist and tactician at work. In life, however, he was a simple, honest uncle who didn't go into complicated reasoning and sincerely attached to his son-in-law. Now he wanted grandchildren, and he told Max about it as directly as he offered his daughter as a wife. Max, when do you plan to have children? I'm old enough. She wants to. She was talking to her mother, and I overheard. You know, we're going to help you with everything. Olivia's going to be a great mom, a caring mom. It's the most suitable thing for her to do. Maxim himself would prefer that Olivia's activity, care, and custody be transferred to a child, or better, two. They had tried to have children, but so far it had not worked out. Olivia was not upset. Since childhood, she was sure that sooner or later everything she aspired to would come true. If she wanted to have a child, she would have a child. And so the wife flew to Spain for the wedding, and Max flew to Cyprus. During the day, we'll go to the Mediterranean fishing from the yacht, in the evenings to remember his youth. His wife's parents did not approve of the daughter's decision to go to the wedding alone, so put up with a solitary vacation son-in-law. Not to offend the guy, finally. Of course, young people live differently than we did. But it's still wrong to vacation separately, Sam thought. No, it's one thing to go fishing without women in a purely male group somewhere in the middle of nowhere. It was quite another to get married and go to an adventurous resort. Just in case, Max hinted to Sam that he would go fishing, find a group of vacationers, fishermen, or at least one like-minded man. That's how he'd spend the whole vacation. Sam even believed him, but Haley pressed her lips together reproachfully and kept silent, reminding Max of a more glamorous, stately version of his own mother. No one accompanied Max to the airport. Haley had expressed a desire to go, but she'd overslept and decided not to go. She wouldn't have time to pack. Maybe she wanted to see if the young, long-legged secretary was flying with her son-in-law. But the desire to sleep overcame her vigilance. At the airport, Max looked for his flight on the electronic board. He stumbled, stepping on something hard, and almost twisted his foot. He cursed quietly, looked under his feet, and saw a child's wooden cube with letters on it, almost like the ones he had as a child. This one rolled the farthest away. A little farther away, a thin girl was collecting the rest of the cubes in a box. Max hadn't remembered her in 1,000 years, but he recognized her at once. Violet. Wow, she hadn't changed at all. Still busy with the same children's toys. That's to be expected. Violet froze, looking around for someone. She didn't see Max. He took advantage of it. He jumped up behind her, quietly handed her the unfortunate cube from behind her shoulder, and suddenly asked in a stern inspector's voice, "What's Violet Henry doing at the airport on a weekday?" "Accompanying kindergartners on a field trip to flight attendants and stewardesses." I didn't expect to remember her middle name. Violet flinched slightly, barely perceptible, and turned around. For a few seconds there was a flicker of confusion in her eyes, but it was immediately replaced by a calm smile, the kind of smile one uses when greeting someone one knows on a first-name basis. "Violet Henry sometimes rests," she grinned softly, indifferently, ignoring Max's tactless prank. I wanted to continue the conversation and embarrass her. But Violet saw the people she'd been waiting for. A little girl with a mop of brown curls and bright red sneakers was running toward her. She was followed by a cheerful girl and a schoolboy. "Mom, it's okay. We washed them all." Violet heard the little girl's cheerful report. "Good girl." Violet laughed. "Here are the cubes. Tell Misha to put them in his backpack, and don't look in other people's backpacks." "I used to play customs with Misha," said the little girl. She looked a lot like Violet. The same thick hair, the same clear skin with a few freckles. The eyes are not light brown, autumnal, not visible, but almost round, big and mischievous. You can already see that she will grow up to be very beautiful, Max suddenly thought. "Thank you, Tara, for bringing order to this gang," Violet said to her friend. "I met an old acquaintance while I was waiting for you." She nodded politely to Max. "We should go. Have a good day. Have a good vacation or business trip." "And to you, girls," nodded Max. The friends separated the children, taking each of them by the hand. They went to the baggage claim line. Somewhere in the middle of the line for the Montenegrin flight, an elderly woman with suitcases was waiting for them. I wonder if he was just choosing between Cyprus and Montenegro, but he chose Cyprus. It would have been funny if they had flown to the same resort town. But we didn't, and probably with children choose other resorts, thought Max. As Peter likes to say, when you have children of your own, you'll understand. Somewhere the carefree and waltzing mood disappeared. Max handed in his suitcase, sat at the bar with a brandy and coffee. It seemed that at the opposite end of the hall still flashed this four moms with children, thin girls of about 5 years. How much he understood about children. They'd said goodbye just about 6 years ago. He could very well be her father. And his eyes. He's wrong, though. There's not many eyes like that. And if the child was his, he would have been informed. Sister Mia, who'd never forgiven him for dumping her girlfriend and not even wanting to meet his wife. Or Violet herself. But as it happens, usually let's make up, my love. We'll have a baby or her mom. Or his mom, at least as a warning that they can file for child support. No one's ever said a word. It doesn't work that way. So there's probably another option here. Violet was looking for comfort after they broke up. And now someone's seriously comforting. That's fine. It's better to think that way. Anyway, she's not poor now, taking the baby to the seaside. When they met, she had never been further than Moscow. Max had absolutely no intention of thinking about Violet any further. He tried to play a game to guess which of the spicy girls in his line of sight was flying to the same place as him. But the fortune teller wasn't distracting him, and there were no really interesting girls in sight, so he kept looking for the familiar silhouette. She had changed, after all. No, she didn't look older. Still the same as a freshman girl. Light, graceful, calm. There was a confidence about her, something else elusive that made her stand out. Yes, she'd always had good taste, but she didn't get to refine it very often anymore. And that wasn't likely to change. She should at least be able to enjoy her vacation. Olivia called from Spain several times a day, counting nighttime in case she had a nightmare or wanted to share her impressions immediately. To start an affair in such an environment, when at any time may come, seeing his wife's call, only to fray his nerves whether in Cyprus or Massachusetts. Max suddenly realized that he was really tired. And if he wasn't hanging out in a bar or on the beach, he was fishing. In the company of a quiet Yaroslavl uncle of advanced age. Uncle Sam. Max was even a little scared. That he likes such a vacation. Is he getting old? It seems very early for that. He returned to Moscow with fishing bikes for Peter, and the usual life continued. The next year, Olivia drove him crazy with her mood swings. They couldn't conceive. It got to the point where she decided to see a doctor. She hated going to the doctor, except for the dentist, and presented it as a sacrifice for beauty. Going to the gynecologist was even harder for her. Max waited doomedly for her to share the details, as was her habit, but he exhaled with relief. Olivia had suddenly stopped sharing, talking only to her mother. While she waited for the results of the tests, he remembered to give her the usual signs of attention and didn't ask her anything, as long as she left him alone. But one day she came, not looking like herself, fell back in the chair and said with a tremor in her voice, "I don't stand a chance." That's when Max rushed to comfort her, just as she had expected. He did feel a little sorry for her. She's not a bad girl. It wasn't fair that she was so unlucky. He said that doctors sometimes make mistakes, that they still hope and try. You know, all the things you're supposed to do in a case like this. He himself was not depressed. He had no burning desire to have children. To be honest, he didn't see the tragedy of life without them. The only fat disadvantage he saw was that without children, Olivia would have to guard and control him. In another year, Olivia, having consulted with her mom and dad, voiced to Max the decision they would adopt a child. More precisely, they would adopt a child. She wanted a girl. Max was used to show firmness, but from the fright remembered the past and answered categorically and adamantly, "No, don't even try to approach me with this proposal again. You have grown like a greenhouse flower. You don't know life. You have no idea what genes these rejects have. I don't have much faith in parenting when there's been 7 generations of marginalized people. No matter what you do, the genes will show up. No, and that's it." He was sure Olivia wouldn't leave him because of that. She loves him too much, and she'll whine from time to time. But he'd put up with that. He thought his marriage was pretty good, generally better than most. And in the deep autumn, a vaguely familiar melodic female voice called out to him in the mall. Max turned around. He didn't remember it once, but he did. A perky girl with a rare name, Deborah, who had once wanted to wrestle him away from his friend Violet. She'd really grown up. Pretty classy, respectable. Looks like she's doing pretty well for herself. "Hello, Deborah. You look good," Max said. "Oh, come on, it's just a courtesy. I'm waiting for my girlfriend. I've already been through all the galleries twice. If you're not in a hurry, let's have coffee." "Why not? Let's do it." They sat down in the cafe. He only had coffee. Deborah had a cognac too. "I'm fine. I don't drive. I'm not good at it. I'm not good at it. There are people like that. My husband drives me. It has its advantages," she said. "It's convenient. Yes, you live in New York." "Yeah, we moved here 5 years ago." "It's good. Violet lives here too, by the way. Your ex-fiancé and my ex-girlfriend. I know that from my mom. I shouldn't have attacked you the other day. I just lost a good friend. But I'm okay with that. It's been a long time. Do you have a wife, kids, or are you a love tramp?" "Casanova. Wife, no kids. Not that I know of, anyway." "He means you don't know much," said Deborah, without a trace of schadenfreude. "You really don't know, or you just don't want to know." Max had already guessed what she was going to tell him. "Here are ears from you. Nancy's daughter has already started school. You'd have to be a principled daughter like Violet not to demand child support." "I don't think that's my kid. I'd have my mother or sister tell me." "Mother probably would if someone told her. Mia probably knows. But my friend told me not to say anything." "When did you and Violet break up?" "She moved to New York a couple months later, got a job at a private daycare center. Some friend of her mom's, Aunt Haley, helped her out, and then she married him. Imagine that. And my mom has a friend. At our women's health clinic, she's the one who told me that Violet came to see them, and that Violet was pregnant. It's definitely your baby. When it comes to Violet, you can be sure." So Violet, Aunt Haley, they didn't say anything to anyone. It was just a quick getaway to New York. Violet left. She was born here, and she's still here. I don't know her address. I don't know her phone number. I don't know her address. I don't know her phone number. Bullet. "Why are you telling me this now?" I don't know, someone should have told you. You decide whether you need this information or not. Deborah laughed quietly. Another 6 months passed and spring came. Roxy had lost weight from worry. Max had always thought thin women looked more attractive, but his wife didn't like thinness. She even forgot his categorical statement about adoption and kept asking, demanding, crying. But one day she met him from work soft, calm, and thoughtful. After dinner, she made them both a cocktail, sank quietly into a chair, and said, "You already have a child, so you don't want someone else's. You don't even ask where I went for 2 days. You're not interested. I went to your sister's. I've been wanting to meet her for a while, and I thought, why not now? They're both great, your sister and your niece. I got it out of Mia that you had a kid. You know how hard it is to get rid of me." No, I'm not going to get hysterical. That was long before my time. On the contrary, I have a good thing to offer you. Don't laugh. I've given it a lot of thought, and it's a good thing. Why don't you meet my daughter? She'll come to visit us on weekends, we'll give her presents, support her financially. Just be friends. We'll have a kid in the house, and it won't be someone else's kid. I know there are cases like this. It's not uncommon for a girl to be friends with her stepmother. She's so pretty, your daughter. Mia showed me a picture of her, and she's very bright, like Mia says. She picks things up on the fly. Her mom's going to be so happy that they suddenly have support. Olivia, I found out 6 months ago by accident that I had a daughter. You may not believe it, but it's true. If her mom wanted my support, she wouldn't have kept me in the dark for so many years. She's a different kind of person. A little weird, Olivia said. Mia told me how you two broke up. She tried to keep the facts straight. I guess she felt sorry for me. It's not for me to judge you. I had 2 abortions when I was young. And now I'm childless. So it's not for me to moralize. If you're uncomfortable talking to your daughter's mom, I'll talk to her. Maybe it's better that way. I'll explain everything honestly. She'll understand. I'll be like Mia's aunt to Nancy. Olivia always thought you were a practical, sensible woman. At least a reasonable one. Where do you get these crazy ideas? Well, find yourself a hobby. Life doesn't end with kids. That's ridiculous. If you worked like me, you wouldn't have time to think about nonsense. Aunts and uncles. Did you ever think how stupid I'd feel in this situation? She seemed to be thinking about saying something else. You could tell, but she didn't say anything. But it's also wonderful that she's learned to stop, if only for a while. Violet and Nancy were returning from a ballroom dancing class. They walked at a leisurely pace. Nancy talked excitedly about her news, demonstrating the new move she had been working on today. It was very hard for her to stop right away. After class, the instructor remarked on her flexibility and plasticity. The day was warm today. The sun was already warming, not just shining. On the playground outside their house, away from the double strollers with grandmothers, a strange woman sat on a bench. When she saw them, she stood up and walked toward them. A well-groomed brunette with a beautiful, tired face. Not a single wrinkle. But you could see that she was a grown woman. Not a student, but definitely not one of the moms or other relatives of the children from this kindergarten. "Hello, you're Violet and Nancy," she asked, friendly but a little tense. "Yes, my name is Violet." "This is my daughter," Violet replied in her tone, but a little wary. "This didn't seem like an official visit," said the stranger. "Violet, would you have a moment alone?" "We can do it here, Nancy. Walk a little on the grounds, please, and chat with our neighbors. I won't be long." "All right," replied the girl, glancing curiously in the direction of the stranger. "I'll be around if you need me." The brunette smiled, escorting her with an attentive gaze, and hastily introduced herself. "My name is Olivia, and I'm Max's wife, Nancy's father." There was a brief, careful silence between them. Violet gently broke it first. Okay, let's get acquainted. I won't even try to hide my bewilderment. Why do you need us? If we haven't threatened your family's budget so far, we won't. I realized that a long time ago. I didn't come to you for that reason at all. I wanted to ask you to let Nancy meet her father. Max has become so shy over the years that he needs a mediator. Violet laughed softly. If he suddenly wanted to communicate with his daughter, having learned of her existence, he would come himself. Especially since you're not happy to mediate in such a matter. I can see he hasn't changed. He's as indifferent to the woman as he ever was. I'm sorry, Olivia, no offense. Just the facts. Violet felt a strange sympathy for her new acquaintance. There was no hostility from Max's wife, no sense of superiority. She did not scrutinize Violet, did not evaluate her, did not compare her to herself. She just stared expectantly, thoughtfully choosing her words. Violet, this is going to sound strange, but I'd love to have my husband's daughter in our home. I don't have children of my own. He doesn't want to foster one. Olivia was silent, pausing again to pick her words. I think I understand. You don't need to explain further. Violet stopped her. I'll tell you a platitude. Doctors sometimes make mistakes. I work in a kindergarten. I know many such stories. Every daycare center has a child whose mother thought she was infertile. Are you hoping for a chance? It helps a lot. What about Nancy? I'm getting married in a month, and for Nancy, my husband-to-be is her daddy. She doesn't even doubt it. She doesn't even doubt it. Me too, by the way, Violet continued. Imagine if this were your child in your situation. What would you do? Yeah, I'm not coming back. I apologize for the stupid idea, the wasted time. I'd have a very different conversation with me if I were you. And I'm sure you'd understand, too, Violet replied. Olivia nodded. Thank you. She turned and walked toward the parking lot, waving to Nancy as she went. And I was still feeling sorry for myself. At first, Violet thought, looking at her, though I was never as lonely as she was. Leslie won't arrive from her business trip until tomorrow. Nancy is already asleep, and Olivia and Nanny have one eye in the other. No, there's nothing to be afraid of course. Max wouldn't be coming. He didn't like to make things difficult for himself and hardly liked it when they broke up. Was Violet not lying about herself already? She was in love with a man she should stay away from in the first place. How could she have been so naive? She asked then, telling her mom. She wasn't even asking her mom. It was a question in space. But Mom answered, if we were smart in love, mankind would have died out long ago. Convincingly, she answered. So that doesn't speak to your personal stupidity. It's just the way things work. And I've had that. What do you think? See, I'm alive and enjoying life. I don't think I can ever really be happy about anything again, Violet was saying. I thought so too, answered Mother. The main thing is that you don't make yourself insincerely cheerful. If you want to wear mourning for love, wear it. It will end. You'll see. Maybe the psychologist would burn me at the stake, but I think so. Violet believed Mom. Mom was not only her own psychologist, but she was also a psychologist to others. Violet was sure that many clients went to her over the years, not so much for a closet makeover, as for a conversation to chat with Mom and see that their problems weren't so dire and insoluble. And then came a series of happy coincidences. Haley introduced Violet to her wonderful friend Leslie. Leslie's older sister Sylvia turned out to be the head of a prestigious private daycare center in Los Angeles and was just visiting. She enticed Violet to join her. Even after learning of her pregnancy, Violet initially doubted how she would be alone in Los Angeles with a baby. Sylvia reassured her. Not alone. Think of us as family. Your mom and my brother are about to get married. I live alone in a big apartment. It just so happens, and I can't stand being alone. I'd love it if you'd keep me company. If things don't work out, you can always go home." Violet was a little hesitant, not ready to leave her mom, her little group. "I spent the night wondering how she would feel at Sylvia's," she said. Her mom snapped at her with her opinion. "Don't think I'm kicking you out by deciding to start a new life. But I'd go if I were you. I'd try it for a reason. Fate throws in coincidences to make it easier for you to start over." And that's how Violet ended up in LA. Living, working, raising Nancy. And a year ago, she met Tyler at the supermarket. I accidentally put a chicken in his cart instead of hers. And that was the last one. We laughed at that reaction. Violet was already married to Tyler for 3 years when she found out she was expecting a baby. She went to the clinic to check in and ran into Deborah at the front door. She had put on a lot of weight, but it looked good on her. "Oh, Violet." Deborah rejoiced. "Look, you were right. You must be a good witch." She pointed to her prominent belly, and Deborah looked different. She glowed with a contented calm. "I'm so glad you and Max are doing well," Violet said sincerely. "I'm fine, but I have no idea about Max. We don't talk. I've only been with him for like 2 months since I met him. I tried like a stubborn donkey to get him to adopt a little girl from the orphanage. He even stopped calling me by my first name, just sister. Mole, I'm obsessed with wanting to have a baby. I'm limited," Deborah said, "and I was really getting kind of crazy. I'm used to getting what I want. Of course, it was hard on me. Max had a young girl when I found out by chance. I didn't feel anything special. I just felt sorry for the girl. I met her, drew a verbal portrait of our mutual Max out of female solidarity. We're still friends, by the way. But she dumped Max. Not immediately, of course, but the main thing by herself. I gave up then, decided to get away. I went on vacation alone so I wouldn't have to see his perpetually disgruntled face. And there I had a resort romance, and I suddenly realized thanks to him my husband does not love me at all, and I do not love him anymore. I was wrong about him. I saw it clearly. What's there to stand out for? So I went home and got a divorce. He even quit his job out of fear, as if my father would go after him. He never would. My dad's not that kind of man. My resort fling turned out to be serious love. Who knew? And now I'm about to be a mom. I'm pretty sure I know the real reason Max and I didn't have kids. He didn't love me at all. And it worked like birth control for some reason. Everyone laughs at me, even my mom. One old doctor said, "Yes, I've seen cases like that. You're not the first. And I believe you if you feel that way. That's the way it is. Bring your baby to our daycare center later." Violet smiled. "I was just going to say that. I'll bring my baby to your daycare center." Olivia laughed. "I'm going to have a son. You don't have to wait so long. Come visit us with your husband." And they exchanged phone numbers. Violet walked home happy. She remembered Deborah sometimes. And it was a sad memory. It was nice to know that another person's life had changed for the better. It seems like they're definitely going to be family friends. If that's how she feels, that's how it is. In the evening, the loud sounds of Indian melodrama could be heard in the house. The cheerful music sounded like mockery. Julia's daughter-in-law, the lady of the house, had been doing chores late into the night. Now she was tearfully scrubbing the floors of the spacious 4-room apartment, while Mendelssohn's March played in her head and the words came to mind registrar. "Do you, Linda, agree to be Christopher's wife?" Why had she agreed? Gave in to her fiancé's entreaties to live with her mother. She put on her wedding ring and was transported into a dark world of hopelessness. Christopher, indulging his mother in everything, did not believe his wife. There was no miracle. Her husband was not going to support and protect her in a difficult moment. And the mother-in-law was dodgy, weaving intrigues, loaded unnecessary work, conspired against the daughter-in-law. It was not the difficulties of family life that frightened Linda, but Christopher's misunderstanding, the unfairness of life. Today she was worried that she had scrubbed the floors for the second time only because her mother-in-law did not believe her, because she had already cleaned the whole house in the morning. In the evening, Christopher supported his mother, not understanding why his wife was stubbornly unable to do simple housework. When she finished cleaning, Linda quietly snuck into the bathroom and closed herself in. Here she could give free rein to her feelings, rest from the family burden. The well-appointed apartment, unlike her country house, was a joy to bathe in at any time, without heating the stove. It was a small consolation to Linda. She missed the peacefulness of the village, her yard, the warmth of communication with the villagers. She drew water with a snow-white cap of foam and sank into the tub with pleasure. She remembered again the carefree moments of her unmarried life, and then her acquaintance with Christopher and her sudden wedding. Linda had fallen in love with the kind guy on the motorcycle. At first sight, Christopher then came to his grandmother in the village. One day, driving through the village, he saw a lovely girl with a black braid down to her waist, a gentle look, and a basket in her hands. It was a marvelous vision, as if a forest nymph had come out of the pages of books. She was walking with the little girl's basket, which had been composed to her by a kind-hearted grandmother for a letter from her son. Christopher stopped and asked her to treat him to a strange berry he had never seen before. Thus began a relationship. The guy surrounded his beloved with care and invited her to live in his luxurious 4-room apartment. Linda immediately did not like Julia Urban, spoiled woman who did not want a soul in her son. She disapproved of her son's girlfriend and called her cunning. And here was a gift from Christopher, a village shepherdess, an orphan of Kazan, without a family and tribe. Linda buried her parents long ago and lived poorly, a lonely postmistress. And at her husband's insistence, she quit her job and moved to the city. Why? What for? There was a persistent knock at the door. Julia's irritated voice brought her out of her reverie. "Are you at it again? How many times have I told you not to lock the door? How many times have I told you not to lock the doors? You haven't brought a penny into the house yourself, and yet there you are, a lady bathing every day. Open the door at once. I have to go to the bathroom. I have a scheduled beauty treatment." "Mom, what's wrong?" Christopher came running to the door. "Your wife wouldn't clean my room, so I had to do it myself. I have a bad back. The medicine's in the bathroom. I've been here for an hour and she won't do it. And she was rude to me. Talk to your wife. You're doing the same old thing. You're slandering me, Mom." Linda opened the door in astonishment, hastily climbing out of the bathroom. "It's been 15 minutes, and I've mopped the floors in every room," she objected. "Look at you, you cheeky girl. Get out of my sight." Julia shoved her sister-in-law violently in the side, causing her to fall. "Linda, stop quarreling with your mother," Christopher said coldly. "Show some respect. Please, if it's not too much trouble for your highness." He turned around and walked away. Angrily stupid. Day after day, her mother-in-law nagged, making up tall tales, complaining about her deteriorating health because of such an ungrateful daughter-in-law. Linda baked pies, cooked French and Italian dishes, studied new recipes, watched blogs on homemaking. Nothing worked. The main goal of the mother-in-law was to get rid of her daughter-in-law by any means necessary, to kick her out for no reason, because such a girl is out of status. Christopher was a famous lawyer, and his late husband was a prosecutor. They still had long-standing ties. They had important visitors, very influential people in the city. Julia was shy of Linda, who didn't know how to handle cutlery. Linda dressed simply gray, refused to go to beauty salons. Her unwillingness to get her hair and nails done made Julia mad at guests. Mother-in-law politely, but coldly pulled her daughter-in-law, told her not to show her face to anyone. A hard, tedious, joyless year passed. Linda got a job as a saleswoman in a store near the house. Her husband stopped giving her money at her mother's instigation. At work, her daughter-in-law was relieved from the endless reproaches. But at home, it got worse. Now, Julia reproached her daughter-in-law for not doing her chores. "My darling, you're always at work, and your husband must be fed and cared for. I'll talk to my son, so he won't let you slack off from housework." "Mom, I have time for everything," Linda objected. "I cook in advance. Everything's in order. I clean up morning and night." "What's this new fashion of working? Quit working. I'm ashamed you're working as a saleswoman with a husband like that. It's a disgrace. Christopher doesn't even leave me money for my household because of you. And I still have a house in the country to keep, bills to pay. Orphan of Kazan, you don't need to spend our money. Christopher buys everything for the house." The arguments upset Linda. Later, her mother-in-law reprimanded her son for how rudely his wife talks to her, does not listen to her advice. Linda was deeply hurt by Julia's words that she was ashamed of her uneducated daughter-in-law. It was painful to remember why Linda never enrolled in the institute. Hope was the pride of her parents. She graduated from high school with honors, planned to enter the medical academy. But a month after graduation, her parents were in an accident, returning from the city. "My father died in the hospital without regaining consciousness. Mom slipped into a coma. For 6 months, Linda traveled to all the hospitals, begging in the hope of saving her mother, bribed, begged for an operation. But the situation was hopeless. No one could help. Mom never woke up again. Having buried her mother, Linda was left an orphan. To get by, she worked part-time in a store, then found a job at the post office. The road to the academy was closed. There was nothing to pay for her studies. Linda spent all the money she had saved on hospitalization and funeral expenses. The hard fate did not bother her mother-in-law. She could not allow a homeless girl from the village to run her house. Julia found a new way to get rid of her daughter-in-law. "Christopher," she said to her son, "we need an heir. Why can't your wife get pregnant?" "Mom, it's been so little time. Perhaps it's too soon to talk about children." "My dear, a child will help reconcile us all. My dear, it's such a blessing. I'd be so happy if you'd give me a grandchild." The cunning mother-in-law cried and hugged her son. "All right, I'll talk to Linda. But I agree, it's up to me." In the evening, Christopher pleased his wife with his desire to have children. He didn't say anything about his mother's request. Julia went to extreme measures, which became known later. Linda rejoiced at the possibility of becoming a mom. A child could really soften her husband, and her life would be happier. She had been living with the dream of a child since her wedding, but she had been unable to get pregnant. Another 6 months passed. Linda cried as she held the pregnancy test in her hands. Disappointment again. Fear settled in her soul. Her mother-in-law would scream. Her husband would support her mother and angrily slam the door. For the 2nd month, he began to appear less often at home, stayed late at work, met with friends. Julia was satisfied she had broken up the young people after all. There was one last step to take. One day, Linda came into the room and saw Christopher. He was sitting there with his face twisted with anger. When he saw his wife, he swung and hit her in the face. "Ungrateful bitch," he shouted and threw a packet of pills at her. "How dare you lie to me and Mom? Explain to me what these are." "These are pills, but this is the first time I've seen them." Linda read the instructions with shaking hands. They were birth control pills. The weight of the last few months of endless humiliation, frustration, and disappointment fell on her in an instant. She collapsed without feeling, no longer wanting to live and breathe in this cruel, absurd world. Christopher, although angry at his wife, felt guilty, but could not bring her to her senses and called an ambulance. Julia snickered at the pills and indifferently sent her daughter-in-law to the hospital. "Mom, why is she doing this to me?" Christopher complained bitterly to his mother. I told you, I told you. I told you, I told you, I told you, I told you. Don't you dare forgive her. This is no way to get a divorce, Mother. I promised her she'd be happy, but she lied to me too. I'll go to work early in the morning, and then I'll visit my wife and talk to her calmly. 3 days later, Linda was discharged. She took the bus home. Christopher didn't meet her, he was at work. A suitcase and a note from her husband about the divorce were waiting for her at home. Her mother-in-law was triumphant. She threw Linda out without letting her wait for her husband. She was just a village idiot, and she still is. You shouldn't have messed with all of us. Get out. I can't see you, you snake. You wanted to separate me from my son. It won't happen. Out, out, I said, immediately. So that you don't breathe. The mother-in-law shouted after her, unwilling to stop her anger and triumph at the same time. In the evening, Christopher found out that his wife had left. Mom, why didn't Linda wait for me? How dare she leave me? Why didn't she say anything? Calm down, son. It was her decision. Julia was careful not to mention the note she'd written, copying her son's handwriting. But how? She didn't even leave a note. You two haven't been getting along for a long time. This woman isn't right for you. What will that hillbilly have for you? Without children, there's no family. It's an omen that if she did, she'd give birth to an inbred simple thing that's nothing to breed. Look for a wife of status by getting rid of your daughter-in-law. Julia felt over the moon she had gotten her way on the plan. For a year, she drank Linda a decoction of wormwood, convincing her that this tea is good for women's health, hoping to bring a young, healthy girl to infertility. Then she slipped her birth control pills. Christopher was upset. He figured Linda hadn't forgiven him for the slap. With longing in his heart, he walked across the room where he smelled her perfume. Sitting down on the bed, he went through the pills. A suspicion crept into his soul. The packages were intact, all the pills in place. Perhaps Linda hadn't taken them. He remembered hundreds of moments when his wife had cried and complained about her mother and he hadn't believed her. The bitter discovery struck his heart with the pain of no return, of loss. He himself, with his own hands, had destroyed love. There is no forgiveness, but Linda is his beloved, without whom it is so lonely and dreary. He will rent an apartment for her, and tomorrow he will go to the village to beg for forgiveness. An Indian song was playing loudly in the next room. Julia, with a blissful smile, was triumphant. She was more at ease when others were suffering, but her carefree life did not last long. One day she would receive a letter that would turn her whole life upside down, change her character, teach her to be compassionate, empathize, do good. But now she was far from even a moment's regret for her dastardly deed. Christopher didn't get out to his wife's home village right away. He had to see the client through to the end. A week later, he took a vacation and went to Linda. As 2 years ago, he decided to ride a motorcycle to return former feelings. He did not inform his mother about his departure. He was offended by her, tried to avoid talking. He even looked anxiously at his sad son, hoping that time would heal him. Julia was already looking for a worthy match for him, obedient society girl, which will distract from sad thoughts. More than once she tried to talk about divorce, but the son waved away, avoiding an answer. Christopher settled all his affairs, packed his backpack secretly from his mother, and left the house. It was a clear spring day, bright. Gladly he set off on his long-awaited journey. Soon he would meet his beloved, whom he missed incredibly. It seemed to him that just today their family would open a new page of life. They would be happy, for he loved Linda so much. The road was covered with frost from the morning. In Siberia, even in May, there were frosts. Prudently, Christopher wore a balaclava and helmet, but the summer tires could fail. But that didn't stop his desire to impress Linda, to revive pleasant memories. The voice of reason was silent as Christopher accelerated, feeling a rush of energy, freedom, and lightness of mind. It was a 2-hour non-stop ride to the village. The road was a country road, not a soul around. After an hour and a half, Christopher carelessly jumped into the oncoming lane. At that time, a tractor appeared from behind the corner. It was too late to stop. He jerked the wheel to the left. The bike rammed into bushes and hit a tree. The brakes didn't work. The wheels skidded. Christopher was thrown from the saddle and rolled down the side of the road. He was unlucky to have a savior. The driver of the tractor was Max, an ex-con who didn't want to be investigated again. He slowed down, hoping to help the motorcyclist. But Christopher showed no signs of life. So Max took his things, got back into the tractor and drove off, leaving the unfortunate man to die. He didn't say anything about the accident, didn't even feel remorse. It was an accident, it was not the tractor driver's fault. And humanity, unfortunately, is inherent in few people. On the same day, Julia's mother missed her son. She found out that he had taken a week's vacation. But he wasn't answering his phone. What a stubborn man, went to his redneck. Did I alarm him or what? Julia thought. She knew where Linda lived before her marriage, but she was not going to go to her place. She decided to wait a week and see. Julia called her mother Peggy in the village to ask if her grandson had shown up. No, he hadn't. Her son's cell phone went dead. A week later, he still hadn't returned. She decided to go to the village herself. She reached Peggy's mother, whom she rarely saw or spoke to. The news was shocking. It had been a year since Christopher had visited his grandmother, whose name was Madeline. He had not come to the village a week ago, nor yesterday, nor the day before. Linda, the letter carrier, do you know anything? Julia asked her mother. It's your sister-in-law, my dear. Are you out of your mind? Peggy was silent, shaking her head. Something flashed in her eyes. She hasn't been in the village for years. Didn't she come to live with you? She and Christopher have been divorced for 2 weeks. Where else would she go but to the village? She's been away. We're almost next door, 2 houses down. Julia, you're not making a mess, are you? I know you. I know you. Where did the kids go? They ran away from you, didn't they? They did the right thing. I raised a viper, not a daughter. You don't show your face around here, you don't help your mother. If it wasn't for Christopher, I'd be all alone. Mom, you never understood me. And I couldn't stand this village. What good is it? I'm sorry, but I was raising my son. It was hard. He's back on his feet. He hasn't forgotten anyone. That's my son. I raised him that way. So you survived, Linda? I was a redneck myself, remember? You got a temper, Julia. I'm ashamed I raised a daughter like that. Peggy told me what happened. Why did the children run away from you? My son must have gone to Linda's. His motorcycle's not in the garage. Where did it go? I don't know. I'm so sorry. Julia couldn't hold back any longer. She clasped her hands together and wailed. Son, where are you, my darling? It's all my own fault. Let's go together, Peggy. Maybe they're lurking out there living. I'll give you the address. It's no use. I don't go. You go on your own and don't come back to my place alone, it'll be safer. You go, I'll call you if the kids turn up. Julia went to the address, but no one was home. She knocked at neighbors' houses. When all around the neighborhood still, there was neither Linda nor her husband for a year. No one came. No one knocked. Julia, by old habit, went to collect information in the village and the store, at the post office, at the club. But it was as if Linda had vanished into thin air. With a heavy heart, she returned to the city. The trail had been broken. Her friends and acquaintances didn't know where her son was. He never showed up for work, never signed his resignation papers. Christopher disappeared without a trace. The last desperate step, a report to the police about the disappearance. For another year, Julia pounded the thresholds of government agencies, visited her mother in the village. There was no sign of her son. Later, remorse overwhelmed Julia. Nothing could dull the pain of loss. It was impossible to believe in her son's death. So she lived lonely, remembering the moments when they were together, though not always friendly. As long as he lived with that hillbilly, as long as he was near. The house was hopelessly silent now. Julia cried at the window all day long with an absent look, but she believed that her son would return. The story didn't end there. Christopher survived. He was saved by a family of witch doctors from the village of Red, which was in the neighborhood of his native village. It was an abandoned village with a few houses, where only the old residents remained to live. They traveled to their native village for everything they needed: groceries, things, small household items. On that fateful day, the daughter of the old witch Dr. Luba went to the store through the village. First she saw a mangled motorcycle, and a little farther away Christopher unconscious. What grief! He must have crashed. What a handsome man he was. She sighed and shook her head. The girl's name was Roberta. She was trained in first aid and often helped her mother treat people. Roberta checked and realized that the young man was alive, but it was not customary for the old-timers to call an ambulance. They lived in the same family, in case of trouble helped each other themselves. So Roberta ran for help. Christopher was taken to Luba's house. Things were bad. The victim hadn't regained consciousness for a week. They searched around the motorcycle, but they didn't find any documents, phone, or belongings. They were taken by a resourceful tractor driver so that there would be no trace of them at all. The stuff was just for his own use. He burned all the papers, even his passport. There was a man and he's gone, missing. The stranger woke up on the 8th day. Next to him sat a black-eyed beauty with a thick braid. When she saw that the patient opened his eyes, she jumped up and cried out, "Mommy, he's awake. Come here." A young but stately woman came in, bent over him, held his hand. "My dear, how will you live now? Where did you come from? What's your name?" But Christopher was so weak he couldn't speak. He shook his head, trying to say something, but he couldn't get a word out. "Roberta, go and get him some broth and tea." "I guess he can't talk. Then maybe he'll write from where?" The man was horrified to realize that he didn't remember his own name. Moreover, he didn't know who he used to be or who he even was. He hammered desperately, trying to get up, fell silent and lost consciousness again. He was later brought out. That's right, resiliently. The guys brought his motorcycle back, put it back together. They wanted to use it to identify the man, but somehow they forgot. It's no use, they thought. After all, the village had hardly developed. A good man, we need him. Christopher didn't remember his former life. It was his fate. Scarlett nursed Christopher back to health. She had fallen madly in love with him. He, too, was enchanted by this extraordinary, caring girl of fabulous beauty. In time, Christopher began to talk. He turned out to be a jack of all trades. He quickly learned to build, put up a log cabin for his own Scarlett, and furnished it. And so they lived together. Vague pictures of the past surfaced, but nothing made sense. With some secret excitement, he looked at the frost, and then all was eclipsed by lethargy. The memories went no further. Christopher was no longer himself. He was given a new name, William, slipped the papers of a long-dead man, buried but not registered as dead. William Davidovich Redfill was born. For a long time he couldn't remember where he came from, who he worked for, or why he was on that road. and Julia was still waiting for her son's return. Her motherly heart told her he was alive. It had been 5 years since his disappearance. Christopher had been reported missing. The bleak days dragged on. It seemed as if nothing would happen until she died. Then one day she received a letter. A very strange message came from the village of Chaslevoix from Linda. On a white sheet of paper was written only one word: monkey. What nonsense! Julia shook the envelope. Nothing more than that. A gap. On the window, the sheet was blank. "That's what I said. She's a mad fool," she muttered. That same day, she left for the village. The first thing she did was to go to Linda's house. She didn't remember at all her son's story about how he met his wife. This time, the door to the house was thrown open wide. It was empty inside. Julia walked through the rooms. It didn't look like anyone lived here. Dust, cobwebs, the smell of damp in the corners. A long, uninhabited dwelling. But in the midst of this emptiness, on the windowsill stood a tattered portrait of a sweet little girl. Julia shuddered and cried. Christopher's bottomless blue eyes were staring at her. She grabbed the portrait, read the inscription at the bottom, Mary. On the back, Mary Christopher Redfield. Can't be. How could it be? For 5 years I've been alone, with my granddaughter growing up next to me. All because of Linda, the village witch. All because of her. She took away my son and hid my granddaughter. What a bastard. Julia howled as she stared at the photograph, stroking the face that bore the features of her precious Christopher. Then she sat down and burst into tears. Tears of remorse flowed in streams. It was she herself who had kicked the good girl out without complaint. She had given her wormwood to keep her from becoming a mother. But what a cruel fate. Linda gave her a daughter and took everything away from her. It's karma. Linda shouldn't have treated her like that. It was getting dark. There was no electricity in the house, so this wasn't where her sister-in-law lived. Julia stood up from the floor, frozen for 5 years, her heart bleeding. Anxious thoughts lingered. She walked to her mother's house. Here, too, the door was thrown open wide. No one inside, empty and desolate. She hadn't been to her hometown of Sunset Valley in a year. She'd given up hope of finding her son and stopped calling. Without her, her mother must have died. No one else in the world. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry." "Where are you?" Julia said, clutching her temples, and fell senseless. She woke up in the dark. The door was cold. She had to find her granddaughter and ask Linda what was wrong with her mother. There was no electricity in the house. She went into the kitchen. As they had been when she was a child, candles lay in a drawer. Julia lit one, set down a glass, and sat alone in the semi-darkness in the chair where she had sat as a small, carefree, mischievous girl 45 years ago, the glare playing on the wall. The silence was incredible. The world froze here in an instant. Not rushed, not demanding sacrifice. What had happened to her soul? The city had taken everything good out of her, made her a cruel city girl. And it's not square meters, water from the tap that you need to stay alive. That's the feeling when you realize you're a real person. Only the countryside can reveal the soul. Julia should have been born again. Sitting alone on that chair in the semi-darkness, where her mother had not thrown it away because she had waited all her life for her daughter's return. In that moment she came home with her whole soul. The grief helped to make sense of the emptiness of her meaningless life in those short hours, as if counting down the time of rebirth. Night had fallen. Business had to be postponed until tomorrow. Julia unraveled her black braid and brushed it out. In the morning she woke with the dawn. Anxiously she opened the closet in her former room, went through the dresses she had worn when she was young. This was where she had lived until she was married, until she met a promising boyfriend who had become a lawyer. Later, they had already left the village, bought an apartment in the city. The clothes were too small. Julia slammed the closet doors. She went into her mother's room, pulled back the closet. There were rows and rows of weekend dresses, all in perfect order, on parade, even the perfume still on. It was an old habit of her mother's to walk around the village only in skirts or dresses. Julia stood in indecision. Taking her mother's things, Julia didn't dare. It wasn't clear what had happened. It was bad luck to wear the belongings of the deceased, but surely she would have been informed if her mother had died. With that thought in mind, she cheerfully selected a plain, straight-cut monochrome dress and changed, taking off her pantsuit she had arrived in. Angrily, she tossed the suit into the dresser. Like a frog, she took off her skin, transforming herself into a beautiful maiden. Julia was a slender, beautiful woman in her 50s, but her strict outfits and dark clothes made her look old. Now she was happily fidgeting in front of the mirror, as if she were a dozen years younger in this simple, old-fashioned dress. It was time to make inquiries, stock up on groceries, and get the house in order. She went out into the street. The wonderful country air made her dizzy. After standing, enjoying the silence, Julia walked to the next house. She wondered why she hadn't thought to go there earlier in the evening. "Hello, Rosemary," said the old landlady when she saw Julia in her neighbor's dress. "Have a good day to you too?" Silence, continued the old lady. "Tell me, where's my mother? With a daughter like that, you can't die." "Fate, it can't be. You, my dear, do not deserve to know the truth," said the neighbor harshly, turning away. "Tell me, I beg you very much, is she alive?" Rosemary stood up, picked up her club, and walked to the porch. The silence lengthened. "She's alive. You get out of here. I have nothing more to say. Don't come here. I won't say anything else. It's up to you to decide how you want to live your life." "Dylan," I shouted loudly, "we'll send Peggy out to graze, and we'll send this one out too," she muttered under her breath, but Julia heard her. She had accomplished nothing more. Dylan, the neighbor's son, passed by without looking or speaking. Julia stood for a moment, then angrily strode away. She passed 5 other neighbors. 2 had already left the village. Their houses were boarded up, their vegetable gardens abandoned, all overgrown with grass in the height of summer. The other 2 neighbors she knew couldn't explain anything, saying that her mother had moved away, but she wouldn't say where. But the village was thriving. A new store had opened. People were farming, putting the cattle out to pasture. The hospital was working. On the local bulletin board, there was a poster advertising a recreation center by the river. The villagers' inquiries were fruitless. Julia decided she had to make a fresh start. Not for nothing received a strange message: the portrait of her granddaughter will change, earn forgiveness. Fate, the girl laughed at her. She decided to start with a temporary move. "I rented an apartment in the city, put it on the alarm system. That way she wouldn't have to worry." But she didn't take almost any things with her. Her old taste seemed unacceptable for the countryside. Julia went to the stores and bought suitable clothes for work and everyday life. She spent the rest of the evening tidying up the household, going through the kitchen utensils. Everything was in a poor state of repair. The old things were old. The wallpaper had not been changed for years. Now she realized how much worse the house was in need of repair. She hadn't thought about it, leaving her mother alone in the village. She only threw in a pittance occasionally, sending money a couple times a year. How her mother lived here alone was incomprehensible. And a bitter thought befell the negligent daughter: what if her son had left her alone like that? Would it be easy for her to live? Her heart was troubled. How could she do such a thing? No, she deserved everything that had happened to her. You can't be selfish, thinking only of yourself. Everything will be different now, she proclaimed into the void, wiping away her tears. Julia spent the rest of the evening cleaning the house. She made a list of things to buy in town. Figured she'd go to the village hall to find out when her mother had last paid the light bill. It turned out that the bills had been paid only 3 months ago. The landlady herself came to Linda's house, and she was treated warily, but the payment was accepted. In the evening, the electricity came on, illuminating the rooms with a cold, dim light. In the morning, Julia packed for the city. She drove her car to the village, leaving it at the gate for the night. But after thinking for a while, she went to her neighbor's house, snuck into the house, knocked. It was open. The house was clean, spacious, everything was in order. Her son had done his best to repair the house. Julia felt ashamed that she had never helped anyone. The angry landlady was about to send her away. "Rosemary, I'm sorry. I was mean." "It was my fault," Julia said. "What a sly fox," grinned the neighbor. "I won't tell you anything. You know you're right. It's too early to forgive your mother. I must find my son and granddaughter before them I am guilty. So why did you come to me? Go back to your place. No one needs you here." "I've decided to stay here for the summer. I've been invited," Julia muttered quietly, remembering the letter from her. "What do you want?" "I'm going into town to do some repairs on my mother's house. I came here to ask if there's anything you need to buy." "Buy whatever Rosemary decides," the neighbor smirked slyly. "What are you from the bottom of my heart? Can I help you?" "Oh, my dear," suddenly smiled neighbor. "I can't pretend to be angry for long. Come to me. I babysat you while your mother was at work." To her great amazement, all of her aunt's admitted sternness did not go away. She hugged Julia, wiping away her tears. "Wait till I write you a list. And I have to ask my son. He wanted to go to town too. Maybe he could come with you." Rosemary's son was a little older than Julia. As children, they were friends and quarrelsome, annoying each other with various mischief. At 15, Dylan left his mother and went to school to become an electrician. Then he came back, got a job here, got married, made an addition to the house. We had a household, we lived together. How painful it was for her mother to see it. Her daughter got married and never came back. "Hey, Dylan." Julia finally found the right words. "Hi from the hatch." Dylan smiled, remembering her past offenses. "Come on, don't bring up old times. I'm going to town. Your mother made a list. Maybe you should go too. Will you come with me?" "You're not at the robbery," Julia said. The irony was uncalled for. When she was a kid, she'd thrown herself behind the wheel of his motorcycle, but she'd lost control. Drove off a bridge into a river, and they were rescued. They banned the bike. Dylan didn't forgive her for that and stopped talking to her altogether. He'd do little things, like scare me with caterpillars or throw mice. "Don't worry, I've been driving for 20 years, said Rosemary. "My husband gave me a car for my wedding, and I learned right away." "And you buried your husband?" Dylan asked. "My mother told me. God rest his soul. I'm sorry." "What you reminded?" Rosemary sighed. "Nothing. Where did your wife die?" "Went out on the ice in the spring, trying to rinse her laundry. It sucked her in. She wasn't rescued," Dylan said quietly. Looking away. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was a long time ago. Let's go to town. Wait, I've changed." While Dylan was getting ready, a girl with a bag over her shoulder ran up to Linda. "Hello. Do you live in this house?" "Yeah, I'm here to see my mother." "Yeah, here's a letter to this address. Sign here, please." "Thank you, girl. Come and visit if you have time. I have to go. Goodbye." On the light-colored envelope was her mother's address, but it was addressed to Julia. Julia opened it anxiously, Was someone trying to teach her a lesson or take revenge? On the white sheet of paper in large letters was a single word, wormwood. Julia shrieked, dropped the sheet. Linda had learned that her mother-in-law's evil deeds could have left her barren. How could that be? Could she have peeked at her while Linda was in the kitchen making herbal tea for her daughter-in-law? "What are you standing there for?" "You got your mouth open?" Dylan asked, approaching and seeing the leaf. He picked it up, reading the strange message in amazement. "What is this nonsense? Did you get a letter?" "Your correspondent is obviously not very verbal." Dylan laughed, but quickly stopped, seeing that Julia stood in a daze with a lost look. "Let's go." The road was silent. They didn't even turn on the music. Dylan dozed in the passenger seat, then opened his eyes. "Your mother came to see us a week ago." "What?" Julia braked hard, almost hitting Dylan's forehead. "She's feeling better. You guys get in. I'd rather walk." "You're being a bit of a jerk." "I'm sorry. But why didn't Aunt Rosemary tell me?" "I was so worried. Do you know what I've been through? I've already buried her in my mind." "Don't yell." "What's going on?" Julia said it quietly, pulling over to the curb. "I don't know. They were whispering in the kitchen without me. And my mother forbade me to talk about it. Don't ask me anything." "I'm going to go," Linda said. "Here we go. Wait. I'll find out for myself. Don't say anything. Let's go." The shopping trip took longer than they thought. It was getting dark by the time they filled the trunk and the back seats. Julia talked Dylan into spending the night at her apartment. He walked around the rooms for a long time, looking amazed. "It's like a museum. What kind of place is this? You must be crazy to live in the country. There's a living room as big as your mother's house." Yes, my mother lives in poverty and my daughter lives in luxury. Patricia's herding the flock is marvelous." "Dylan, I know everything." "Calm down," Julia stopped him. "You'll sleep on the couch. Come on. I'll feed you, but I won't give you caviar." "I'll feed you, you furry hedgehog," Dylan replied playfully. Julia thought that it was unbearable to live alone. Caring for others gave her energy. Dylan was thoughtful, looking at his mistress with respect. The evening was not going well. The guest was obviously hiding something from her, but Linda didn't ask any more. The letters led her to some goal, like stages of tests she had to pass. In the early morning, Dylan got up, lifting Julia. He never left his mother alone for long. He had to help with the chores. They came back when the neighbor had already put the cow out to graze. "Why didn't you come back yesterday? Every hour counts. I can't cope anymore. And it's getting scary to spend the night alone," the neighbor said. And then she smiled and invited us to tea. They unloaded the shopping. Julia brought a set of pots and pans as a gift for her neighbor. She knew that cookware is the main problem of village housewives. Rosemary went to deny, but accepted the gift. The hut was clean, cozy, warm. The hostess brewed tea, put a film with lambs, jam, and honey. A quiet morning in the village, peaceful. Julia sipped her tea. She looked at her hostess with bewilderment, remembering something. "And I suppose you were bitter. I suppose others had a sweet life? Remember that with wormwood?" Julia choked. Rosemary was coughing and crying. "You eat it with jam from the freezer. You eat it with jam from the freezer. It'll be less bitter," she said with a sly squint. Julia shuddered. Tears ran down her cheeks, and she jumped up and ran out without looking at anyone. This had never happened before. Nothing disturbed her heart. She had easily done mischief to her sister-in-law. But now a long dormant conscience woke up and troubled her soul. Julia sat on the bench at the gate and could not calm down for a long time. There were no thoughts in her head, Only tears flowed unrestrainedly, washing away the blackness that lived in her soul. Nancy's granddaughter was to take away the bitterness of life. A little while later, Julia began to unpack. Then she fiddled in the kitchen until evening, took everything out to the veranda, painted the ceiling and walls, deciding to wallpaper. She just mopped the floors. She had a rug, contrary to village tradition. The old kitchen furniture was falling apart, needing repair. Julia persuaded Dylan to help, who willingly patched the holes. He's a real piece of work. In his 50s and early 50s, he's still got the skill to work with his hands, Julia said with admiration. Dylan laughed at the carpet and told him to paint the floors. You can help me organize the furniture. It's up to me to decide what to do. You city folk are all cuckoo. Linda dismissed him. Oh, for crying out loud, all right, let the carpet be for now, and I'll have the floors repainted later. You'll throw that carpet away in 3 days. Let's see how hot you get at the river. I bought a vacuum cleaner. You've never even heard of it? Dylan gave Linda a friendly look, a playful nudge, a playful look. Oh, Dylan, stop pushing me around. Oh, Dylan, stop pushing me around. We don't have time for that. We have grandchildren to babysit. You didn't let me babysit my former grandchildren, he said bitterly. The son of a border guard, he doesn't show his nose at home. It's been 10 years since we've seen each other. Son, I don't know anything about you. I don't know about anyone. I took care of myself. Only my son is left. After his mother died, he cut off all contact with us. He left, as if he'd disappeared into thin air. He writes letters once a year. What's wrong with that? He's made his own arrangements. He got an apartment in the Far East. But he didn't have a family, Julia said pityingly, and hugged Dylan. He suddenly responded, hugged her and kissed her on the lips. Linda was taken aback. Are you crazy in your old age? You don't know anything. I was in love with you when I was a kid, and Madeline, the town freak, was the first one to jump on me. I don't need any more help from you. I'll see you around, Dylan muttered. He turned and walked away. Right, you're going to teach them a lesson, aren't you? Linda called out to him. What's mine? Wait, you can't talk here. Dylan came up to Julia, kissed her again, and quickly left. She stood in a daze for a minute, then sat down to drink tea in the newly transformed kitchen, sparkling clean. Dylan had hung the chandelier she'd envisioned, installed a floor clock with a pendulum on the wall, adding to the coziness. Only the old set spoiled the overall impression. So the furniture was worth updating. Linda could order new sofas, a wall, an armchair, a bed for her mom. How easy were these things to do now? Why hadn't she thought about Mom's comfort before? For a week, Julia made repairs, ordered furniture. While she waited for delivery, she painted the ceilings and walls. For more than 10 years, she sat on the couch with soap operas, and now she worked, impressing the neighbors unprecedented for a mature woman's vigor. Her back and arms ached in the evenings, but Julia didn't complain. She endured, glad that God had given her the strength for such an important work. During that week, Dylan visited her more than once, helping with cabinet repairs and rearranging furniture. Julia got used to him, communication became warm, he often stayed late. They remembered the past, made plans. But about Linda's mother, Dylan refused to talk. At parting, he hugged her like his own, but he did not allow himself any liberties, kissing her innocently on the cheek. On the 8th day, the renovation was finished. The old cabinets from the kitchen were dismantled for firewood. For her mother, Julia chose non-tarnished furniture of a pleasant gray shade, which gave the kitchen a new glow. The house sparkled with magical colors, with new furniture, fluffy carpets. Julia put all her energies into the renovation and, exhausted of energy, fell asleep on the new sofa. She woke up to a knock on the door. The postmistress Patricia came. The game was dragging on. The family sent a package. Julia opened it anxiously. This time there was no message, just 2 jars with some contents. She opened it carefully, tasted it. Wormwood and the same thing. It's a vicious circle. I chose the right path as a mother a long time ago. I did the repairs. I realized what a despicable thing I'd done to my family. I lost my son. Tell me, haven't we suffered enough? Didn't we? I'm sorry, it's early. It's early, Julia said. Didn't you understand? Came Dylan's voice. Didn't you lock the door? They're going to steal my beauty. Scared you? Linda flinched. The door? Oh, that doesn't make any sense. What didn't I realize? You have to lock the door. That's not what I meant. You just said you didn't get it. Are you all kidding me? Nobody. You did this all yourself. You did all this renovation. If you don't want to tell me, don't tell me. Just go. Don't make a mess. I'm here. We need help with the household chores. My mom asked me to. All right, I'll come back in an hour. Dylan stomped around for a while and came out. Julia made breakfast, working out in her head the problem she'd been given. If Linda knows about her intrigues, Julia has to go through it too. First to feel the bitterness of life, and then there would be hope and a path in the distance. Her granddaughter Svetlova kept saying, and drank the jar of wormwood infusion to the bottom. She choked, took a drink of water, and collapsed without feeling. By evening, Dylan found Julia sleeping soundly in the kitchen. There was no way to wake her. He carried her to the hall and put her on the sofa. Linda looked charming in her sleep. Dylan decided to stay close to her, to wait for her to wake up, so he locked the door. He went into the kitchen. His eye caught a jar of some kind of potion. He sniffed something familiar. He remembered the inscription in the letter he'd recently received. Wormwood. Dylan thought that Julia's mother had continued the punishment, but he wouldn't interfere. Let things run their course. They say Julia herself had been scheming against her daughter-in-law for 1.5 years, playing with her fate and her relationship with her son. Dylan turned off the light and lay down on the bed in the bedroom. He fell asleep quickly, a sound, healthy sleep. Julia woke up when there was deep darkness outside the window. She was surprised that she had no memory of the previous day at all. Opening her eyes, Julia squealed with horror. There was a dark silhouette standing on her doorstep. She ran to the bedroom, closed the door, sighed, looked at the bed, and a scream caught in her throat. In the semi-darkness, she saw Linda sitting with her legs overhung. She was pointing her finger, whispering that Julia had ruined her unborn children. Linda fell to her knees. I'm sorry, Linda, the frightened woman pleaded. I pray to God. I'm guilty everywhere, but I don't hold a grudge. An ominous silence was her answer. When Julia looked up in fear, she saw that there was no Linda, but a man sleeping on the bed. She jumped up, a pounding in her temples. Her head was spinning. She listened silence. It was only when she looked out into the living room that she realized there was no one there. Turning on the bedroom light, Julia breathed a sigh of relief. Dylan, how you frightened me. But he was sleeping soundly as a baby, not awakened by her cries. Turning off the light, Julia went into the kitchen. There was still someone standing at the threshold, a dark silhouette. It walked quickly toward Julia. Dazed with horror, she skidded back into the bedroom, but there stood her mother with an angry expression on her face, moved her whole body, approaching, threatening her with her finger. Why did you have children, you naughty daughter? You've ruined everyone's life. You yourself are wearing silk. You didn't think about your mother. Mommy, don't. I'm sorry, don't swear, I'll fix it. Everything will be different, Julia begged. Her mother had almost reached her and held out her hands. Dylan woke up. He saw Julia staring into the void and whispering in a frantic plea for forgiveness. "Julia, what are you doing?" She finally saw that there was no one in the room but Dylan. His shout cleared her eyes, but the fear remained. "There's someone in the hallway," Julia whispered. "You're a mess," Dylan said, shaking his head. "You should take less of that stuff." "Why did you take wormwood last night?" "Wormwood doesn't give you visions. It was spiked." "That's right. And you knocked over the second bottle," Linda said. Julia flinched. Linda was talking to her. Monkeys eat." Linda laughed. "Oh my God, I'm imagining things again. Do you have a headache?" "Impossible," Julia said. "Let's go to Mommy. She'll tell you what to do. Take the jar." Julia obediently got ready. She could still hear footsteps in the house. Shadows seemed to lurk in the corners. She fumbled around, grabbing Dylan's arm. Without letting go of him, they came to Rosemary's room. She picked up the jar, took it, and laughed. "Well, my dear, how long will you dream of things? A mushroom for a mushroom. That's what you should have called the potion." Rosemary laughed again, but sat the guests down. She fiddled with the herbs and poured some fragrant tea. "Here, drink this. It'll make you feel better." "You must have a headache," she said to Julia. "Thank you." "I hope it doesn't make me quite," Julia mumbled. "If you don't want to, don't drink and get out of here," Rosemary said sharply. "Why are you acting so strangely? You're persecuting me and helping me." "Julia, remember the main truth: everything can be forgiven, but guilt in front of an innocent child cannot atone." At home, Dylan gave Julia a lecture. Said that today he would not babysit her. He would come back in the evening. The woman entered the house anxiously, not noticing anything suspicious. Her head ached hardly at all. She felt like going to sleep. Julia fell asleep quickly, barely putting her head on the pillow. She was awakened by her own voice. "Hello, daughter." Her mother was sitting on the edge of the couch. "Mommy, hello. How I missed you," Julia exclaimed. "How beautiful you've made it. Would you have done it before?" "It was so nice," replied her mother. "Mom, I'm sorry," Julia cried, and tried to get up but couldn't. She forcefully crawled on the couch and opened her eyes. The whole pillow was wet. There was no one in the house. "I was dreaming," she whispered. "But Mom, we'll meet. In fact, I'll change everything." Her head was still heavy, dizzy and aching in her temples. Julia walked to the kitchen, took a jar of jam, tasted it automatically, struggled to do her household chores. Having moved, she decided to cook something tasty, to make pies to treat Dylan in the evening. She had a secret liking for her neighbor Christopher. He was as at ease with her as if he were her own. After an hour, she was surprised to note that her headache was gone and her consciousness was clear. A burst of strength and appetite reminded her that she was quite well. "Monkey helped monkey, because after the tea I had dreams," Julia said. Julia started a new phase of her life and decided to find something to do to keep busy. She used to work for her husband at the prosecutor's office as a secretary. Together with Christopher's father, they had made a fortune and had become respected people in the city. But now Julia realized that no luxury could replace family. The longing for her son, the desire to see her granddaughter and meet her mother had become the main value of her life. It was getting dark. Julia cooked goodies and waited for Dylan to arrive. Then she got angry and decided to go to bed. There was a knock at the door, but instead of a neighbor came a girl who handed Julia an envelope and disappeared. This made Julia angry. She wanted to throw the letter away, but she overpowered herself, sat down and printed the message. "There are many roads to redemption, but unfortunately not all of them are peaceful," Julia read aloud. Sounds like a threat. "It's my job to scare you," came a man's voice over her ear. "Who's there?" Julia shrieked in horror and jumped up sharply. Dylan laughed. "You're sincerely making fun of me," Julia rebuked him. "Did you do it on purpose? I was baking you pies. You're not getting any. Get out of here. I'm an old woman, I have nerves. I have a weak heart. If I don't live to see my son and granddaughter, you'll be responsible for this sin. Just so you know, mark my words." "You just cursed me," Dylan grinned. "You should close the door. What's the fashion for you to swoop in like a witch? I'll go. Good night, mad woman." Wait. Sit down, eat. Woof. What are you doing?" "Well, you give me as a dog commands." Julia was outraged. "Okay, sorry, I'm kidding. Get your pies." "Okay, but don't scare me again. Next time, I'm sure I'll give my soul to God without fail." "You've got another 30 years on you," Dylan laughed. "What kind of treatment is that? Are there no other words for me?" "There are, but you'll like them even less," Dylan replied. "Shut up. It's scary to imagine what's going on in your head," Dylan said with a sudden change of tone. Then he added with a smirk, "You, my love, are like a splinter in my head." Julia choked on her tea and coughed up tears. She wanted to say something. Instead, she sat silently, her eyes wide. "You're out of your mind," Dylan grumbled. He hadn't expected such a reaction. He wanted mutual recognition, a warm relationship. He wanted Julia to lower her eyes demurely, take his hand, and tell him that she needed him. An indignant Dylan jumped up and ran outside. Julia straightened up in her chair. She hadn't expected such a reaction from herself. She considered herself a reserved lady. Where did she get this country bumpkin attitude from? Silly, she thought. The next morning, ashamed to remember last night, Julia fulfilled the promise she had made to herself. Before lunch, she went around the city looking for work. Everywhere she was offered only temporary help in the household. Then she resolutely went home and changed her clothes. Redemption is what was needed, she repeated to herself the words of the letter. The first thing Julia did was to stop by Rosemary's house and help her with the vegetable garden. Then she went around to the neighbors to make life easier for the elderly. She didn't take money for her work, and she refused to buy food. It was dark when Julia returned home. Her back ached, but she felt happy. For the first time in days, she felt proud. As she approached the porch, she heard some rustling behind the house. A dark figure. Was she imagining it? Deciding to see what was there, Julia took a few steps and suddenly fell into a hole. She hit her head on something hard and lost consciousness. When she woke up, Julia couldn't tell what time of day it was. It was completely dark. She twisted her head around and tried to get up. When she hit something, she shrieked and felt around, and there were wooden walls everywhere, with planks on top. She was trapped in some kind of box. A cold, sickening feeling of fear and hopelessness scared Julia to death. "Help me! Help me! Help me! Help me!" she screamed, hysterical. It seemed to her as if an eternity had passed, and at last her body quieted. Her head was splitting with pain. Taking a full breath, Julia calmed down. She remembered the words of the letter. Not all paths to redemption are peaceful. This is too much, too much. You can't torture a man like this. You can't, Julia screamed and cried, pounding on the walls of the box. Then she noticed that the lid was sliding open. Julia put her hands and head against it and with an effort opened it. The daylight blinded her eyes, which were unaccustomed to brightness. She blinked, then stood up. Her heart nearly stopped with horror. She was standing in a grave, in a coffin, in a cemetery. Gathering her last strength, Julia began to climb out of the grave. At that time, an inebriated watchman came running to her screams. When he saw someone climbing out of the grave, he almost had a stroke. but he still ran up and managed to push Julia back when she was almost out. Damn zombie. You've got a heart, but you've got an ugly face. Where did your kin put you? Muttered the watchman. Despair seized the unhappy woman, but she guessed to speak calmly. Grandfather, grandfather, she cautiously called the watchman. This is the work of the evil power. Lord, forgive me sinful, I repent. I swear I won't drink anymore. Grandfather, I'm alive, I fell here. I came to visit my family, and here's this open grave. Grandpa, help me, please. Cunning, pretending to be a human being, said the watchman cautiously. He looked into the grave and saw Julia in black work clothes, with her hair tangled and loose. Help me, you idiot, you damned bastard. Help me out of here. Get me out of here at once. Julia whispered in helplessness, like a hiss. Holy Mother of God, the guard exclaimed fearfully and ran away, making the sign of the cross. Go on, you heartless man. Get out yourself, he said. At the third attempt, Julia got out of the grave. The cemetery was deserted, with a field beyond. A narrow path led somewhere. But where was the village? It was hard to figure out. The paths to redemption are far from peaceful. How did I even end up here? How could anyone do this to a living person? Julia pondered. She sat down by the roadside and began brushing her hair, which seemed to be purposely knotted and tangled in the ominous silence of the cemetery. Thoughts of life and death came into her head. Here is the end of everyone's life, the grave. How much of us is empty, unnecessary, superfluous, and all of us have the same end in a hole under the ground. Lying on the damp earth, Julia thought, as long as I'm alive, I need to think about more than just myself. She didn't cry. She just accepted it. Washed, go down that path over there, as if the road was telling her. Or to a new life one must pass. Maybe this is the path of redemption, not a peaceful one. Mommy, Mommy, tell me, you're the one who played games with me. How could you do this to me? Julia knew the answer. She had forgotten the way to her mother's house. It was time to return to the place where her soul would be born again. In her mind, she forgave her mother for everything. It was important to go through this redemption, any hardship. It was necessary to beg forgiveness. The path led to the road, but no one passed by. After 15 minutes, Julia was exhausted. She was thirsty. Her legs ached. She sat down on the side of the road to wait for a car. A tractor showed up. By a fateful coincidence, Max was behind the wheel. He agreed to give Julia a ride to the village for a small fee. As she sat down next to him, she breathed a sigh of relief. Then she noticed a familiar backpack at his feet. Julia leaned over and was horrified to see the secret embroidery on the strap, which she herself had custom made for her son. Explain at once where you got that from? She asked sharply, stopping the tractor. I found this backpack by the roadside, picked it up. It was a long time ago, Max replied. I don't remember when. Tell me the truth. Julia slapped the driver. Max did not tolerate it, got out and threw the woman out of the tractor with force, and then drove away. Julia made her way to the village in tears. She was determined to find out about the backpack. The hope of finding her son loomed ahead. His backpack was here, which meant Liam was coming not far away. He and Linda must be messing with me, Julia thought. When she got home, she locked herself in the dark and fell into a heavy, restless sleep. Dylan came to her more than once, but he couldn't get through to her. Julia woke for the first time late in the afternoon. She heated water and washed herself properly. She ate with appetite. Life was coming back to her. The apathy of the last few days had subsided. Julia got dressed and picked up her papers, deciding to go to the police station. Hello. 5 years ago, my son went to the village of Rodnoy but never returned. Wait. The officers on duty will call the district police officer to you and make a statement with him, Julia was told. An hour later, the woman was invited to the office. "Hello, Kevin. This is the district commissioner." "What do you want to see us about?" the man asked. Julia detailed the events of 5 years ago and described yesterday's incident with the backpack. She was asked to write a statement and promised to look into it. In the evening, she received a phone call and was told to come to the station. They refused to search for her. No good. "Here's a brand new backpack with no embroidery." They searched the house, found nothing, Kevin said, showing the backpack. A clever man figured out what was going on. He got rid of his son's things, burned them in the backyard. Julia got nowhere. The trail went cold, but she didn't take a statement. "Your Liam's missing," the precinct officer said harshly, shooing the woman away. But Julia didn't give up. She decided to turn to Dylan for help. She needed to nail Max to the wall, but the neighbor refused to help. "Are you crazy? Just live in peace. Everything will work itself out." "Don't you understand? That's my son's backpack. I haven't seen him in 5 years. This bastard's obviously up to something. If you don't help me, I'll go to him myself." "You can't stop. And anyway, where were you yesterday? Wandering around the vegetable gardens again?" "Yes, I was helping. Digging underground." Julia didn't want to say anything to scare Dylan. "I'll be honest, it's a great distraction from my darkest thoughts." They stood in the doorway, embracing each other as if they were young, with all the burdens lifted from their shoulders. People who had passed the test, forgiven each other for the present and the past. Dylan and Julia made no secret of their relationship. Rosemary took it calmly, only told them to help with household chores as before. 2 days after the cemetery came a new message. Julia was already waiting for it. She opened it without excitement. It was a postcard with an invitation to visit the vacation home by the river. Dylan took the news calmly. Rosemary sighed mysteriously, smiled imperceptibly. They both knew the landlady of this inn. Julia was waiting for the last test. No matter how much she begged, Dylan refused to go with her and remained adamant. Julia hastily packed, took the invitation card, and set off on her journey. It was a short drive, about an hour on a country road. Then the path changed, and it became more difficult to drive in the field. Every now and then the car bounced on the bumps. Finally they arrived. The rest house, which occupied an impressive space, appeared. Several hunting lodges and a 2-story building were located along the river. At the gate, the guard let Julia through without question. Pulling into the grounds, she read the name. In bright red letters on the hull, it read Morocco. 5 years ago, Linda Svetlova found herself on the street because of her mother-in-law's sneaky schemes. The biggest blow was the betrayal of her husband. He did not believe her, did not support her, threw her out as a mean woman. Linda couldn't bear it. Her heart was broken. There was no point in living any longer. Without a shadow of a doubt, she stepped into the road, but a man passing nearby pushed her away a second before the irreparable happened. Linda's head was only slightly bumped, but she was still taken to the hospital. The doctor told the unbelievable news the girl was pregnant. Only this saved Linda from the terrible pain in her heart. She wiped her tears and decided to live against fate. Linda did not want to return to her husband. She could not forgive his betrayal. There was only one way left to her homeland, to her native village. When she returned, she put the house in order and cried for 5 days after being locked up. She had to organize her life for the sake of her child. Linda pulled herself together. She went into town, quit her job at the store. Peggy, Christopher's grandmother, the same Maria Ilinichna, met Linda at the store and told her to tell the truth. They were more than just neighbors. Linda often helped Peggy in the household, came to visit her. The girl became family to this woman. But Julia did not know this and did not see beyond her nose. In the evening, pregnant Linda could not resist and told Peggy for a long time what she had been through for a year and a half. The neighbor cried, unable to believe her own daughter's meanness. Then the old woman took Linda in to help her through this difficult time. The girl got a job in a bakery and managed to help her patroness. When Julia came looking for traces or news, her sister-in-law was in the next room. She was also the one who bribed the villagers to make her mother-in-law think Linda had not returned to the village. Not for a second did the daughter-in-law feel sorry for her mother-in-law, but the news about Christopher alarmed her. She began to search for him. Her first attempts to find her husband proved futile. 7 months later, Linda gave birth to a daughter and named her Madeline. One day, walking on the bank of the river, the girl thought how good it is in the village to rest from the city. After all, it is a very good idea to build a house on the shore, so that the townspeople could rest in it. This thought she shared with Peggy. To Peggy's great surprise, she brought the whole 2 million wrapped in a dish towel. Wow. How did you get so rich? I've been saving. Julia used to give me money like a dog. I couldn't spend it. She didn't set eyes on me for 5 years. Christopher used to come and leave me some money too. I'd save it up. I'd give it to a good cause or a church. I don't need anything myself. Take it. I'm sorry to you. I've been suffering because of my daughter. Thank you, Linda said. It's not just for me, it's for you and a good cause. After consulting a lawyer from the city, Linda got a permit and bought a plot of land by the river. The first house came out small. At first, she didn't think it would be anything worthwhile. She advertised in town and people showed up. They bought places 2 months in advance. A year later, they built 2 two-story buildings and added hunting cabins. The demand did not fall, and the profit grew. For the summer, Linda and her grandmother moved to a cabin built especially for them. All the while, the girl continued her search. She knew that Christopher never came home. He had been expelled from his job because of his long absence. Linda traveled all over the neighborhood in search of her husband. One day, she remembered the God-forsaken village of Red Lion, who lived under the name of William. Scraps recalled the past. Once he easily settled a dispute between the men, reading from the former lines from the laws. After that, the villagers began to go to him for minor matters, to secure their property by law or to formalize the land, to fill out documents. It became clear that more than just a guest was being sheltered. Over time, Christopher grew cold toward his common-law wife. An unknown anxiety overtook his soul. He went to the river all day long, wistfully remembered the same village, grandmother, paintings. The past life was gradually coming back to him. Roberta immediately realized that William began to avoid her. The stern girl packed her things and returned to her mother. Linda did not even think of returning him. He only brought suffering with his indifference. There, in the depths of memories, awoke the feeling of a mysterious girl with a basket of flowers. He saw her in a dream, walking along the road. Then all was cut short by a black cloth. So he was tormented for another 6 months in fragments, remembering the past, trying to find out where he was found. And the next day, without informing anyone of his plans, he got ready to go to the village of Rodno. In the morning, he got up early, got on his motorcycle and drove away. Almost 2 years had passed since he had crashed before reaching his destination. Now he knew for sure that this journey had to be completed. That same day, Linda arrived in the village of Krasnoye. She went around 5 yards before they dared to tell her the truth about the accident. Linda was taken to Christopher's house, but no one was there. The villagers waved goodbye and invited her to visit. She could finally tell them who they had taken in. "He's from our village," they said. Christopher pulled onto the road, read the signs, looked around. Then he looked at the cars that occasionally passed by. He instantly refreshed his memories of that fateful day when a tractor had driven into him on this very spot. Linda, A sharp pain stabbed at his heart. How could you be without me? He guessed that the whole misfortune had befallen them only because of his own mother. One planted packet of pills and a fictitious note had ruined entire families' lives. Christopher took a long time to come to his senses, hesitant to continue on his way. He walked between the trees, climbing out of the abyss he'd been living in for the past 2 years. It was like coming out of a coma. Finally, he decided to go to his grandmother to cheer and comfort her. It seemed to him that an eternity had passed. When he reached the doorstep of his grandmother, he ran into the veranda. Toward him, hearing the motorcycle, Peggy ran out. Both were crying and laughing. "Christopher, you're alive, sweetheart. I believed you'd come back, that you were alive," she exclaimed. "Let me look at you. You've grown up so much, and I'm still the same as my grandmother." "Don't cry. It's all right. Everything will be different now," answered Christopher. "And you rascal, how could you torture us for 2 years? Didn't your heart ache? Didn't you feel sorry for your family?" "I just remembered you today. Grandma, where's Linda? Did she come looking for you?" "You don't know anything," Peggy said, and led him into the house. Christopher saw a little girl looking at him with clear blue eyes. "Daughter," he breathed out and choked back bitter tears. "I kicked out my pregnant wife. For 2 years she was alone without me." The girl shook her uncle's hand and ran off to play. She did not immediately get used to strangers, brought up by her mother and grandmother. She was too young to understand the complexities of life. "Where's Linda? Did she go looking for you?" "She's been looking all the time. She went to Red," Peggy said. Christopher shuddered, realizing that he had missed his wife and that fate was confusing them. He decided to wait here for her return and had a long talk with his grandmother. Peggy told him bitterly, "Your mother, Julia, not only Linda, but your other girls were scared away from you, from your son. She once even confessed in a fit of despair how she had separated you from Linda, how she had written that letter in your name, how she wanted to make her infertile." Christopher could hardly believe his mother had arranged such meanness. A lump came to his throat. He shouldn't have believed his wife defending his mother. Because of her, he almost lost the life of his wife and daughter. "Granny, you can't let it go. You can't let it go. You can't. I don't want to see her again. I don't want to know her." Linda returned late that night. As she approached the house, she saw Christopher's motorcycle, burst into tears and rushed into the house. Linda rushed in and threw herself around Christopher's neck because she knew her lover had not betrayed her. Peggy ran to her mother and began beating Christopher with her palms, afraid that her uncle would hurt her mother. They decided to all live together, but they moved into a vacation home that needed owner supervision. Peggy stayed on, promising to move in with her grandson and great-granddaughter later. The vacation home prospered, growing. Christopher's help proved invaluable. With the property properly registered, they expanded and ran the business wisely. Christopher called his daughter Baby and spent all his free time with her. The girl loved her father and became attached to him with all her heart. For 3 more years, Christopher did not want to hear anything about his mother. Time has softened him a little, and he decided to forgive Julia. But only by changing would she be forgiven. Christopher himself devised a plan of redemption. Linda and Peggy did not immediately accept the offer to teach their mother a lesson. It seemed too cruel a way to bring Julia to her senses. "What? Christopher, we've already suffered for 5 years, just like Linda lost you. Julia didn't even spare our future children," said Peggy. "I never drank her poison. It was impossible to drink that stuff. Sometimes the decoction was switched, and sometimes it poured out," Christopher replied. "What did she use? Wormwood. Let her drink the wormwood herself." It was like this. Christopher had been living in the house of Rosemary, a neighbor. When Julia came to the house, the son was in a room a few feet away from his mother. He was glad she was near, alive and well. But changing her character was more important than meeting her. For the time being, Peggy moved into Christopher's house at the recreation center. Christopher wrote a message, changing his handwriting beyond recognition. He wanted his mother to feel a little of what Linda had experienced. It didn't seem enough for him to just confuse her. He invented a whole epic of redemption, remorse, separation from his granddaughter, the bitterness of loneliness. Rosemary also made the frost and wormwood. The wormwood was laced with sleeping pills and hallucinogenic grapes. It seemed unnecessarily extreme. But Christopher persuaded Rosemary's neighbor that there could be no harm. The drugstore had a remedy for the poisoning, which they put in the drink. Christopher came in at night when his mother drank the wormwood concoction, worried about how she was feeling. But it turned out that the son only aggravated the situation, scaring Julia to death. The story of the repairs and help stunned Christopher. It was beyond his plans, but it was a good sign. Julia changed beyond recognition, started dating Dylan. The neighbor was against this punishment, but he couldn't change anyone's mind. Only supported Christopher in her troubles. The hardest step for the son was the story with the cemetery. But one day he cheated death himself, as if born again. He looked at everything with different eyes. He wanted his mother to feel the same way. He made a shallow hole, but forgot to put the shovel away. Julia hit her head, luckily not badly. Christopher gave her a shot with sleeping pills and took her to a pre-prepared hole in the cemetery. There was actually a man to be buried there, so the grave was dug hastily. He had made something that looked like a coffin, more like a box with a lid that could be easily removed from the inside. He had even carefully placed a pillow. Later, Christopher was horrified at what he had done, but remembering that Linda had lived in hell for a year and a half and had almost lost her child, he calmed his conscience. He waited anxiously for his mother's return. He knew that she would be picked up by the locals on the road and that her lust for life would take its toll. Julia returned in a sorry state and then went to Kevin, the precinct commander. But Kevin knew Christopher's history and was even friends with him, taking advantage of his legal knowledge on occasion. He called Christopher beforehand and asked what to do. That way Julia didn't find out ahead of time that Christopher was alive. Perhaps the son's decision to leave his mother in the dark was too cruel. For 3 years he held a grudge. The only thing he couldn't forgive was Linda. Peggy and Grandma Rosemary softened his heart. They sympathized with him wholeheartedly. Linda and Rosemary wanted to tell Julia several times that Christopher was alive, but they did not dare to interfere. The long-awaited moment had arrived. Julia arrived at their vacation base and walked into the main building. There was no one in the lobby. An Indian tune was playing. She looked around, saw the television, and was taken aback. Pictures of her granddaughter, mother, daughter-in-law, son were changing one after another. Christopher, she whispered quietly with tears. "Sorry, Mom," came a familiar voice from behind her. Julia turned around, saw Christopher, cried out, and collapsed. She had to call an ambulance. Later, her condition worsened, and Julia was taken to the city clinic. The woman had suffered a stroke. Christopher could not believe what was happening. Instead of a happy reunion and family reunion, he drove his mother to the hospital. Peggy, without a word, packed up and left for her home in Miami. The magical transformation of the dwelling hurt her heart. Everything had already been lovingly arranged. Her daughter Linda had performed a miracle with her own hands. The old mother sat on the new couch, thinking that Julia had recently slept there. "I forgive you, my daughter," she said tearfully. She lay down on the couch and fell asleep. She never woke up again. In the evening, Peggy was visited by Dylan as usual, but it was too late. He broke the sad news to Christopher and Linda. 3 days later, the funeral was held. Half the town was there to say goodbye to Peggy. Christopher and Linda wept uncontrollably. Their daughter Nancy screamed loudly, not understanding why her beloved grandmother was buried in the ground. A week later, Julia was discharged. Still recovering from the blow, she tried to speak, but nothing came out. She could hardly move, mumbled and cried. For the first time, the family lived at Peggy's house. Christopher dropped his mother off, gave her massages, made her exercise, and in the evenings got on his motorcycle and rode off somewhere. He couldn't forgive himself for the anger he harbored toward his mother. Whatever she is, she's still family. He himself is just as bad a person. He himself must walk the path of redemption. His mother's illness and his grandmother's death weighed heavily on Christopher's shoulders. Dylan came to Julia, took her in his arms, put her in the stroller he had bought for her, and they walked together along the river. After 2 months, Julia began to talk and walk on her own. "Dylan, I want to go home," she said. "Where to?" "To the city," Dylan asked. "And son? Granddaughter, are you with me? How can I leave my mother?" "Will you visit?" Julia asked. "We'll get her a helper." Dylan was really attached to Julia. After some thought, he agreed. The next day, while Christopher and Linda were at work, they left for the city. Christopher was informed of the move by Rosemary. She shook her head sternly, and from then on stopped all communication with him. 10 years passed. Young, beautiful Nancy, who was now jokingly called Maria Lovna, graduated from high school and entered teacher training college. Over time, Julia grew stronger, recovered. In the city, she took a rehabilitation course at the best clinic. She and Dylan moved to the country for the summer. They stayed with Christopher and Linda. Rosemary lived in the city with her son for 5 years. She passed away quietly, with God's blessing, buried next to Peggy. We were neighbors, and we still are. The family council decided that Nancy would now live in town like a queen. They entrusted her with Dylan's ancestral apartment. Julia and Dylan sold the house in the village, gathered up their savings, and traveled. Too many painful memories were here. Christopher and Linda sold Peggy's house, deciding to leave the village. They bought a condo in Miami, hired a manager for their vacation home base, and moved in. They visited their daughter almost every month until she graduated and got a job in her home village as an elementary school teacher. Julia and Dylan came to visit to see their granddaughter. They traveled to every city in the United States and then went abroad. Over time, the vacation home passed to Nancy, who stayed true to the land where she was born. Every summer, she came to the cemetery with a basket of peanuts to visit her grandmother.